My name is Tarek. Welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Daring Minds after a little break in which nothing big happened, just like the World Championship and all. The whole scene's melted down. People are at each other's throats. Probably the best team of the whole year is being sold off piecemeal, or is it? Or are they going to Asia? Or are they not going to Asia? Or are they going to time travel back to COD and play? Who knows? No one knows except George. And even then, I've been told he actually knows nothing. He's just a fraud. And what's bizarre is normally people who are just frauds and have like really bad contacts usually use like Twitter eggs or he's just stupidly using his birth name and everything, his face and everything. Like, mate, you're just making a terrible reputation of yourself, making all these rumours up.
Yeah, I just thought I'd go all out, you know. What's the point?
All right, there you go.
You know what I mean? Yeah. It's ridiculous. I might as well just lie for fun at this point.
I mean, the joke is, by the way, if you've seen some of the recent shenanigans that have gone on, obviously even in other games, I mean, technically G2's related, right? The people really must just think like real journalists are idiots, because the people who are the leakers, well, obviously they just don't need it. They don't have to have a journalistic process, right? They can just leak anything they want the second they hear it, whether it's legit or not. They must think we're morons, mate. They must think we never hear anything. We're just like sat there going, oh, it's the occasional story, fully vetted, of course, checked out, multiple sources, really is happening. Like, the joke is you just throw shit at a wall. And here's the saddest thing, George. I've actually noticed this, right? The problem is, if you portray yourself as legit like you do, then if you have one story that's like one fraction not totally correct, they act like you're the scumbag. But if you actually are a known leaker who people know, like, essentially there's a lot of shit signal noise in here, it's almost like people just love having like inside info, and they just forgive those guys. Have you noticed that? They don't get dragged over the coals. It's so weird, isn't it?
No, of course not. I mean, this is the thing. When you have your name like attached to you, there's always just something that people can like latch onto, right? And it's like, you know, if you see this guy and he just gets one thing wrong, or there's something that's not quite right or something along those lines, it's like, because you know that he is reputable and he is someone that, you know, maybe like you guys might actually want to like become, if you want to become a journalist or whatever. And it's just like, you know, nah, fuck this guy. This guy's horrible, you know, like he's wrong, he's terrible. But then the leakers, it's like they're cool, they're like memes, you know,
true,
they're like
yeah.
attach themselves to the, yeah, exactly. They can attach themselves to the normies and
the elite.
Exactly, yeah. That's what I mean. Like they become these kinds of personalities that are like intertwined with the actual community. Whereas us, we're seen as like actual demons that just prey on everyone. It's what I mean. Like, it's ridiculous. But no, this is like, it's just the way the world is really. You know, so.
That's why, you know, esports is just an inverted domain, because like in esports, it's like if TMZ was the most trusted source, and then like the Times is like, why are they just making stuff up to get hits off the arena? You know, like,
true, yeah.
I know it's mad, isn't it? So anyway, this episode obviously is going to be one where it's going to be, the reason we brought George on is he's obviously doing all the tracker of all the off-season moves and breaking the real ones and whatever fake ones. Again, he apparently uses his birth name and face to represent, even though they all check out in the end. And spoiler, I'll just skip to the end of the movie for everyone who's going to go, no, but about this one time when it didn't. Yeah, that means the move was being planned, but it didn't go through. That's actually how that system works. It's not all made up, is it? Like, obviously some deals don't happen. And in fact, you'll see in interviews, people say, I was close to signing with this team, or, you know, we were going to go to the squad. So that, by the way, that isn't like, I got you. It didn't happen, did it? It's like, you know, you'll notice his report never says they have definitely gone to this team. It'll be like they're in talks, in it. So just check out words, basically. They'll help you.
You can't do the semantics these days. You can't. Because it's like, it's like if I say, you know, this player's in talks with this, he's going then. It's like, it's not what I said though, is it? Like, and then as soon as, if that deal doesn't go through, as soon as I like update it saying, the deal hasn't gone through, they're like, oh my God, no, like I'm the bad guy. Like I'm the one who like, I'm not the one with the contract negotiations. Yeah, no, honestly, it's ridiculous. I know everyone likes to remind me there was like the one Hazed incident where I reported that Hazed was going to be out of NRG because he was planning to retire, like literally having the discussions of retirement that he came out and said. And everyone's like, oh my God, he got it wrong. What an idiot.
Pros can't ever fucking decide when they do and don't
It's ridiculous,
yeah. How many times have you seen a pro say they're retiring and they actually retire?
Oh, it's mental. And the other thing they'll also do as well is, if the pro just doesn't like you, even if he was like planning on leaving or retiring, because he knows there's that like area where you can't verify it, he'll just even publicly be sort of like, terrible, all these rumors people make. You know, like, you fucking arsehole. You're because it happened in CSGO recently. A guy basically tried, it was config, if you don't know, tried to claim that, like, these are just rumors. And all he did in the sentence, like, see if you can spot the key word. He goes, these rumors are mostly BS. Like, how much heavy lifting is the word mostly doing here, my dude? Like, what? Surely they're all BS, you know what I mean? So anyway, so obviously Gio has been away for a while. She wasn't working champions. for whatever reason. Again, we don't address these topics, just didn't happen. Let's see next time. But she was obviously watching Optic lose the final and popping off on Instagram, which you do a lot anyway, but you will put a concerted effort in this time, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, because the thing is, I actually missed a lot of the beginning of finals because I was out of the country and busy doing other things. And then it was when, like, the playoffs and stuff started happening that I was really starting to pay attention to champs. And I was really rooting for Optic because they're, like, one of two teams that I've ever actually felt particularly, like, invested in terms of as a fan. In Valorant, and I really did want to see them win.
Even from back when they were Envy, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was back when they were Envy that I first, like, really, decided that I liked them as a team. And it was a really good grand finals, regardless. I think that anybody who's, even if you're not a huge Valorant fan, could probably appreciate that grand finals for what it was and the story that comes along with it. But yeah, no, that was pretty fun. Sucks for Optic, very unlikely to have another go at trying to win any kind of trophy together, I would imagine.
Why don't we start with that topic then? So obviously, I'll just say at the beginning of the disclaimer, which again is a waste of time because anyone who's just going to take the headline and the clip, like, isn't going to listen to this disclaimer or repeat it, are they? So obviously, anything George says on this episode is he's just a guest speculating. And if he talks about a move that either is reported, it's either a report that already existed, he's not dropping the info now. And if he doesn't say, like, this move, if he just says something, I think he might go there or it'd be interesting, then that's just like anyone's pipe dream. He's not actually reporting it. And do not do what everyone used to do Richard Lewis, which is just go like, Richard Lewis confirms, player A will join, and he never said any of that, of course.
This is what people need to understand, right? Is like, if George breaks news here, he doesn't make any money from it. But if he breaks news on his own platforms and on his own, like article thing, then he makes money from it. So which is he going to pick? You decide.
Even then, people get annoyed. They don't even click on the articles. I've had people just reply, just like, "Yeah, fuck the article, mate. Just you've said everything I need to know on Twitter. That's all I need to know." It's like, come on, mate. Like, it happened yesterday as well when I reported like some stuff on Sentinels and stuff, and I was saying about how they were going to
Sentinels. Surely not that fan base. Come on.
Oh, mate. Honestly, I was like tweeting about how I just tweeted like the headline or whatever that Shazam's like contracts expiring, and I was like, oh, they could have new coaches and stuff coming in. And then they were like, "Oh my god, give me Sentinels info. What are you talking about? Give me like." It's like if you've read it, you'd understand.
You know, by the way, like those are obviously the classic, like TSM and League of Legends. They're the classic fan base that always use that retort of like, you're just using their name for hits. It's like the joke is, mate. Actually, if you just want hits and a nice day, you report like some Cloud9 news or some awesome Optic news, or something, and everyone goes, "Oh, great!" Right? It's like if you're a journalist, the day you have to drop some news about TSM that like they're losing a player or like the Sentinels is like they're going down, that's actually the worst day of your Twitter experience. You're like, right, well, fucking get the hazmat suit on, like let's just get the fucking the goggles do nothing. It's a nightmare in it. Like there's not that isn't even worth it for the hits.
No, it's just honestly, I remember there was a time where I think it was it was a TSM move. I think it was about I can't remember who it was. It was one of the like
Wardell,
it was one of the no, it wasn't Wardell. It was like an unknown player joining TSM at the time. I can't remember who it was because it was one of the new people. Anyway, I can't remember. And I remember some of the replies were like, "Oh my god, why the fuck did they get this guy?" And it's like they just continuously just a barrage on this like guy who just joined a team. Just under I was like, come on, can you just give me a break? Like, me and this player have not done anything wrong. They're just joining an organization. Like, blame the fucking organization. I've had people that were fucking blaming me for it. I'm just like, I don't know. Some people, honestly, genuinely, I'm convinced some people think I'm like some overlord that has the power to make all these decisions. But no, like it's just I don't know. I think honestly at this point, I'm just anytime there's any sort of news, I just delete Twitter from my phone, just walk away.
Learn how much the education system failed so many people.
I mean, look, the demographic that we make content for will always remain like typically quite young. So at the end of the day, inherently, they're not going to be like, I guess.
Worldwide or whatever, yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, there's just certain things that they don't really pick up on. But like, I can understand it because when I was like a few years younger, I was like, fair enough. I was a bit stupid as well, so it's all good. I completely understand it.
Let's just start with the Optic topic, though, because obviously that is the biggest news. Like, when they announced their partnership, there's the problem, by the way. Everyone, it's fine if you say franchising, by the way. It's not really technically franchising. It's not the way it's franchise fee. It's not league that's closed. Like, but here's the thing. In the same way as everyone calls all those player associations unions, when, again, legally they aren't unions, like, it's just a colloquial term. So we don't mind if someone says franchising, but technically I'm going to say a partnership program or whatever the fuck, because that's just a simpler way to explain it. Obviously, the major news was Optic, the best team in the world. It's so far the lineup, even going into that Envy team last year, so let's say like 15, 16 months. And then over the whole year, I mean, they were top 3 at every single one of the tournaments, including win one, obviously were second place at the Champions. Like, on paper, that is aggregated the best team in Valorant. Well, not only is the org not going to be in the partnership program, but as a result, I mean, I don't blame them, the team isn't going to stick together, it looks like. And especially because, I mean, if you ever saw those graphs that they do, where it's like how hard someone's carrying, like, it would always be like all the players here, and then Ye would be like up there, like, what the fuck, who? And so if he's obviously the most eligible, like, free agent ever, and he obviously speaks English, all the rest of it. So the most recent news, and obviously this is where we're going to start speculating afterwards, before he was implying in interviews, like, we might stay together, like, I could have gone for this, like, $1 million to APAC or whatever. But the most recent news basically is Cloud9's going to swoop in and sign him, and they're trying to go, like, to a super team, right, George?
Yeah, so Cloud9 were, I guess, they sort of made it clear they did want Ye as soon as all of this stuff started happening. Because I think Nature actually said yesterday, and he sort of mentioned it, so I can mention it now as well.
Okay.
Was 100 Thieves were the ones that were trying to get Ye more than anyone, really. There were, like, deep negotiations there. They were discussing it. They really wanted him, but it ended up just falling through. And Cloud9 was sort of next on the plate to be like, yeah, we're going to have this guy, like, you know, serious offers coming in. And it did end up sort of going through a bit of a lengthy process. But I think the whole thing is that Cloud9 do want to build this kind of super team. The last player is unannounced, and I will try and get that out as soon as possible. But once you guys see who it is, I think you'll sort of understand why I use that term. But this is what I mean. I think, like, some people think that, like, some people had questions about the move, and realistically, I'm sitting here and I'm like, this guy's the fucking best player in the world. Like, you know, whatever team he's on, it's going to be somewhat good to some degree. But yeah, the whole move is pretty complicated, I think, considering the fact there was a lot of interest from 100 Thieves prior to them getting cryo. So I think that Ye did make the right decision, because I think that 100 Thieves were, I don't know. I think it's like, it really comes down to how he'll sort of gel with players. I know that's a very big thing for him. And I think that Cloud9 will probably be a good team for him to sort of do that on. Because I know Optic made him quite comfortable. Like, he was more than happy to stay with the Optic team. Like, the rest of the Optic guys,
sure.
You know, the rest of the Optic guys wanted to play together. So
this was the thing that in the interview he did with Richard Lewis, he spoke a lot about how him working with FNS was, like, really important to him, because as an IGL, he made that environment that he knew that he could thrive in. And so that made, like, at the time that came out was before the Cloud9 thing, as far as I'm aware.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
So it's interesting because he'll be presumably under Vanity, like, so that'll be interesting. But also, conversely, I want to know where FNS is going, because there's no way that he doesn't get picked up.
Sure. Well, here's the thing, though. What we should do first is, because George obviously done that thing of like, I know, but I can't tell you. I've got to see.
I know that. That very last. I was thinking, like, he knows.
So here's the question, though, Gio. What we can do now is we'll just do, like, process of elimination, like the game Clue, basically. So obviously the premise goes, Ye's going to join. They've already got Zeppa, who obviously is very good. Leaf's very good. Vanity's and IGL's pretty good. What spot is left, and who would you speculate? Who could it be?
Well, but hold on, because do we know that all of those players are staying?
It's just what it says on .esports. I can't confirm.
No, they're all staying. Yeah, they're all staying.
Okay. But because here's the thing also I want to add in, Gio. Remember, if it's going to be a super team, it does imply with his secret that it's going to be a big name. So what role would it even be? Who could it potentially be, do you think?
I'm gonna
spitball.
Hold on. I need to actually get the roster.
Because the problem I have is this, basically. Like, obviously, you are teased that it's a big name, right? The problem, I agree, because here's the problem. Like, Zeppa and Leaf, yeah, they're really good players. Ye's obviously mega. If this is just like a normal players to fifth, though, it's not a super team, is it? Like, if it's a super team, it better be like bangers all the way out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think again, I think one of the big questions that I will have, and I think that a lot of the fans will have once Rostermania is over, and this goes for almost every team, maybe like except 100 Thieves, I guess, would be roles. Because nobody knows what the meta is going to be, and nobody knows how these things are going to pan out.
That. So how do Leaf and Ye share? Like, there's going to be some overlap there.
Yeah, of course.
And then you've also got to remember that rosters have got to be 6-man. They can't be 5-man rosters now.
Right, yeah.
So it could be that Leaf becomes the 6th man and he shares that role with Ye, because you don't know if like, is Ye going to remain like a chamber player? And if he is, are you going to bring in a separate Sentinel player, or are you going to rely on Ye to be then a Sentinel player going forward, even if chamber falls out the meta? Because I don't really think that's the best use of Ye's like resources.
No, Ye will. I think Ye will get free roam to do basically whatever he wants.
He's always going to be the opper, right? So presumably then either Leaf completely changes role, or Leaf is the 6th man. In which case, what we need is someone who was in Zeta's role, which would be like an actual initiator, like a Sova player. In which case, I would want to see someone like Trent from the GOUD like come in. I think that would be kind of cool, because I also think, and this is partially judging on how Cloud9 have done things in the LCS this year, but that combination of like a younger player and then like these more like really big heavy hitters like Ye, that would be kind of like cool, and like have that sort of like prodigious sort of vibe. And then you would want someone who can actually like be, I guess, a more mainstay Sentinel, which I think is also a really weird thing to kind of think about right now, because we don't know what that's going to look like, right? Because we've started to see Cypher come back in and be played, especially during Champions, we saw that. But like in the time leading up to Champions, we really haven't seen a lot of like solid Sentinel role for a while. And you've got to question, like, is Killjoy going to come back? Because then you want to look at like players like Net, for example, who is a really good Killjoy, but we haven't really seen Killjoy be that relevant for a while. So is he someone that you want to bring in? Like, I think that's going to be the role that is the most meta dependent and will probably require a lot more of a versatile player to be picked for that sort of 5th role as a just in case. Like a just in case, we don't need you to be a Sentinel, and we're going to have a chamber still, and then we need a Jet on the team as well, right? Like, I feel like that's going to be a little bit less defined than, you know, something like, I don't know, what Vanity is going to be doing. He's just going to still be playing.
Do you want a totally off the wall one for you? Here's a good one for you. We'll see. We'll see George's poker face here. Because here's the thing. I think this is just a pure speculation. I think he thinks he's safe, right? And that you're going to be totally off the mark, because you're probably going to think like someone else from Optic, some other, and like you went with the GOUD. That's a pretty good one. We
also don't know if they're going to import.
Are you ready?
You know.
Well, here's the thing that no one's thinking about. Do you know who Cloud9 signed this year? That is a very key figure in a certain scene that would be able to get players that you couldn't get in the past. They signed the guy who built the Gambit teams in CSGO, and they had a Valorant team that just split up, didn't they? So maybe one of their players comes to NA for a super team.
Nats would be a sick choice, I think, as well. Like, that was something when I was on Valoranting the other day, I spoke about that, like what the odds that Nats would be.
That would be, I mean, like I said, the guy who basically was behind the team is in Cloud9 now, so it's a pretty good link, right?
Yeah. So if you, thinking of like the Sentinel role, he, I guess, could be...
That would be a super team, right? Think how hype that would be. Even George did that little hint, like, I hope they all gel together. Like, no, come on, mate, whatever. We might be off base here, but I'm just gonna pretend that's real. That's
the point of Rostermania.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Well, it was the isn't it the Gambit guy that is it not Groove? I can't remember. Is it? Yeah, it's Groove, right? It's Constantine. Yeah, I think that's his. Yes. Yeah, that's his name. Yeah, I know that Cloud9 are quite a big fan of him and what he's done, because he's a veteran pretty much. Like, he's done this. He's like, from what I know, he as a person is very much like sort of moves all the shit aside, just gets on with it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
super
he's
professional.
Yeah, super professional guy. I will say that I think imports will be very interesting, because I feel like North America is one of those regions where they prefer everything to be just the way it should be, if that makes sense. They're not as in they're not a fan of like culture clashes. They're not a fan of things sort of not going their way. They're very sort of cliquey. You know what I mean? Like not in a bad way. I guess sometimes in a bad way, but most of the time that's usually how they operate. Like you're much more likely to get a North American into an EMEA team and that to work well than the other way around, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Just from my perspective on some of the players and how they sort of operate in teams.
The idea of EMEA in any esport importing an American feels very, very backwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I just feel like that. Yeah, because it's like when you think of like imports, we think of North America is this really rich region that has loads of money, and EMEA players are like, oh my god, let me go because this is fuck loads of money and I get to play for all the viewers and get all these kinds of like, do you know what I mean? Like that's just usually what they go for, but. I'm talking about if there was a player that like actually really wanted to win and all this kind of stuff, then maybe there could be a chance that happens. But no, I think I will say that some of the best. I'm trying to say this in the most sort of political way possible, but like again, some of the best players in EMEA do have offers from North America.
Sure.
And I think it would be naive to say that there's not a possibility that they could sort of go to North America. I think with some of the Russian players, it also comes down to like logistics as well, especially if they were to move to North America, because a lot of them have family. I know Nats especially. I think Nats is still a law student, I'm pretty sure, and he's still sort of doing that kind of stuff. And I think that
that's so embarrassing for all the like Western pros that are just like, waking up at 2 p.m, like rolling out of bed, like, trying for scrims. This guy's just like was in the best team in the world. Then on the side, he's like just trying to get my law degrees.
Yeah, he is very.
Oh, is this triad or not? It's ridiculous.
He is very intelligent. I have to say, like he was built for like greatness. That guy, he's a legend. Like when you talk about pros that like actually put in a shift and really try and work hard and don't fuck around, like Nats is one of them.
I think it also says a lot when there is a team who kind of hasn't really existed as a team since the start of the year and they are still hot commodities now. Like that's nuts. Because, yeah, I mean, like I've, Redgar's another one which I've heard has been approached and by certain teams and stuff like that. And it's like, they haven't been able to play at like the top tier in fucking ages, and they're still in high demand. It just says a lot about those players.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, if you had to actually pick Gio, a player from Optic to maybe join you, would there be one that you would pick to join this team?
To join FNS. I mean, but specifically to join Cloud9, no, because that's like Vanity's already there, so there's no real need for FNS. But like if I had to see Ye in a vacuum go somewhere with another player, I'd pick FNS. I mean, I guess when you consider like the roles that would be needed, like I don't know, it's hard because like the role that's the most obvious one there is Crashies, but I don't know if I'd pick Crashies over like another like someone like BCJ, for example, right? Like, I don't know if... And also, Crashies and Victor really want to stay together, right?
Right.
Because they're both unrestricted free agents, and they're kind of selling themselves as a duo. And, I mean, you definitely wouldn't need Victor there with Zeppa there. I mean, they both do the same thing, pretty much. So that's kind of a hard question to answer, because I think if Ye's going to Cloud9, the roles required, unless you're going to do a huge role shift, but I just don't see a place for FNS and Vanity to be on the same roster.
Sure.
But yeah, given the roles required, I think that you could probably get higher value from plucking from somewhere else.
By the way, since obviously you pointed out earlier, like it could just be that they're going to swap roles around and no one knows what the meta will be. I will say, if fans out there are thinking more in terms of sports, are like, well, he's a striker, this guy's like a winger. Like, I will tell you, especially if they're making super teams, players are way more likely to actually, in my opinion, overestimate the ability to swap roles. And they really will just think like, like basically 3 players who were the best at one role to be like, well, if we all played together though, like we're all smart players, we could all. And if you know, like historically, like those don't really work. Those
I
teams.
think the word super team is such a fucking curse. Like, because what usually happens is you get a lot of players who are picked for their individual ability, and without being seen as like what the adhesive between those players is going to be.
Yes.
What makes a really good team is a team who is greater than the sum of their parts. And usually when you're picking 5 players because they are all independently incredible, you're not going to get something that's greater than the sum of its parts, because you're going to have things like egos, different ideas of how the game should be played, different styles of playing the game. Like, they haven't been considered contextually, they've been considered in a vacuum. And I think that's always a really, really scary thing to base a team around. I remember seeing it in Rainbow Six a few years ago, where we had a Vitality and G2 tried to do the same thing, and both of them fell flat on their face. Team Liquid fucking failed at it this year in League of Legends. And it just happened. You just see it in all sorts of esports, and it just never works. So if a team themselves ever say like, yeah, we want to build a super team, immediately back off, sell your merch, give up your stocks. Like, that team's not going to do well.
Well, I mean, I will say it's very good headline strategy, though, I have to say.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Definitely works very well for us. So I've had no problems with it. But obviously, no, I mean, like, it's just one of those things, I think, especially, I don't think I would have said it if I didn't know who the last player was. And I think, it's one of those things where it's like, but I will say that it's not FNS.
Is it Tens?
No.
Well, the other person I was going to say is like, is it possible that this is the kind of roster that someone like Sick finds themselves on? Because Sick is known as being a very versatile player and kind of got shunted to the side a little on Sentinels. And his versatility could be something that is quite attractive to teams, especially like knowing that they don't know what the meta is, and there's an upcoming soft lock for the rosters, right? And then the hard lock is early next year. So someone like him, who is kind of known for being able to cover basically any role, like, and because coming from Sentinels, like there's a certain amount of celebrity that comes with that as well, right? So, yeah.
Well, I think it will be a massive risk to bring someone like Sick, because I think he hasn't played for quite a while. Obviously, he took that mental health break. So it would be a bit of a risk. I think I know that. So the player that they will get, I think, does have a lot of versatility. It's just he hasn't really shown that versatility for a little while.
Okay, that narrows it down.
It's a he. Yeah. Yes, it is. So they're not.
What about this then? Before we shift off the Optic topic, one question I did have for you is this, George. To me, this was so obvious, and I'm amazed. Like, even though the story was like, we'd like to stay together, dude, that's the thing I'm amazed by. With all these teams, remember, there haven't been that many teams in NA that have done much, like internationally, the champions and the VCT. I'm amazed a lot of the other orgs didn't just go, look, if you actually want to come as an entire 5, we'll just wipe the deck and bring you in. Like, was there not more interest in that?
Yeah, I think, well, there was one organization who was willing to just basically go like scorched earth and just fucking get rid of their entire teams to sign them. But that never really materialized. And it was one of those things where it just became too difficult, because everybody obviously has their own, like, each individual negotiations they have to go through, and their own agents, and their agents tell them one thing, and then their players and then their teammates telling them, oh no, you need to join for this amount, and all this kind of stuff. And there's just so much, like, there's so much little, like, intricate details involved that it just became sort of impossible in the end. Because it's not like you were shifting the entire team from just one place to another. There's just a lot more, like, intricacies, because they're all still very talented individual players. And I guess really the only sort of pair I guess you could make was, you know, Vic and Crashies, because they just done that themselves. So I think there's definitely a lot more. There's just a lot of nuance to it, and I think it would have been a little bit too difficult. But again, I think a lot of it does come down to, I think, like, the North American culture, I think, is also partly to blame, because it's not impossible. You know, we saw FPX are doing it with Na'Vi. All those players except for Ardis is going to go to Na'Vi. So, you know, I think it's definitely possible. It's just, I don't think it's really feasible in that sense, because they also have a lot like, as you can imagine, there was so many offers for all of those guys.
I'm sure individually they can all get more in the market.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll also say that's where even if in interviews they're like, we'd love to stay together, it's like, well, I won't be because I'm getting 1.5 million. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, there's that as well, right?
Yeah. It's like some of them want different things, like, unfortunately, like, of course they're going to say like, yeah, I mean, I wish we could have stayed together, but it's like, we don't live in an ideal fairyland. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's one of those things where we sort of have to sort of wake up.
It's interesting. One of the points that Juvenile made on Valoranting the other day, which I hadn't really thought about, was he compared it to when the Overwatch League was first formed. The Dallas Fuel kept on the Envy roster, and the Envy roster was the star Western roster, right, in Overwatch in the Apex days. And they were arse in the Overwatch League. And he was like, carrying a full roster who has seen success previously into a new league when all of the other teams and organizations around you are restructuring, and they're going to be picking, like, kind of cherry picking who they think are the most valuable, because they have more choice to do that now. That's not actually going to guarantee you any success. He was like, I genuinely don't think that if the entire Optic roster stayed together, they would have the same kind of outcome that they've seen this year. I just thought that was just a really interesting way of thinking about it.
The part that's naive there, basically, is you don't know, essentially, if you're buying at the peak and it was just about to drop off, essentially. Like, yeah, as you say, like, that lineup's been together a long time, especially as a core. Like, if anything, it would actually be a miracle if they stayed EMEA for 2 years, wouldn't it? So... one thing we should actually say before I do move off the Optic topic is, obviously, we'll use actually this maybe as a moment, because there's a bigger discussion we also have to have, is the whole, like, why did a team or org not get into the franchise that's not a franchise, that's a partnership system, which obviously, on this one, by the way, as well, I will say, it's basically going to be pure speculation. Like, spoiler, I've even poked around, and all you need to know about the way that those leagues worked. I noticed this started big with OWL for me, right? Because even in League of Legends, actually, people behind the scenes will be a lot more forthcoming on info. But the way you knew on stuff like OWL, it really is just like, not only have you literally signed that document say they can just sue you to the ends of the earth if you ever reveal anything, but also there is the fear that, like, you'll just be blacklisted to oblivion. Like, even in OWL, sometimes people, like, would just, like, behind the scenes not even cop to real stuff. Like, no, we don't know why the team, like, even though they definitely do. So, like, all I'll tell you is when I've poked around some of these big ones that were, like, really conspicuous, some of them even claim themselves not to know, and that's all a big shock and it all came out of nowhere, even though it's like, really, like, some of them are way more borderline to me. It's like, you should have at least done it. Basically, the joke is, like, this is like some mad game of musical chairs where apparently 40 kids thought they were getting like 10 seats. So I kept saying all those past episodes, Gio, that's aged like a motherfucker now. I kept saying all those past ones. There are all these people just in NA alone who all think they're getting a spot. And it's like, and that's in a world, remember, where you haven't had the NRGs field the best roster. TSM wasn't barely even in the game. There was always people waiting in the wings who potentially could have come in and scooped up slots from the best teams, as we've seen. So, George, give me like the basic overview on your take on this, right? Have you sort of figured out a general framework of what got people in, what didn't? Because obviously fans are using every metric as how good the team is, what the history of the org is, perceptions of if they have money. Have you got a sense of what actually get people in or didn't?
Yeah, so I think there was two stages to this. I think there was two major stages. I think the first one where teams got, I guess, shortlisted, which is when basically Riot was like, oh, okay, the Optics, the TSMs, yeah, we'll put you through the shortlist. We're going to choose between you guys and we'll get rid of like the lower tier, like Zero Marks, but like all these kinds of like organizations that aren't big in the slightest, obviously you're never going to make it in a million years. Once that shortlist happened,
by the way, like the GOUD, except like these people, it would have been a miracle if these orgs were getting it, if people don't know. I don't know how good the roster is, right?
Yeah, so I think obviously when that shortlist process happened, it was made apparent to me that, okay, these are just shortlisted because they're the most popular organizations and they're almost guaranteed to be in contention for the slot. And then the final, I guess, decision, I think, was not only based on financials, which is obviously data that me and a lot of other people are never going to be able to see in a million years.
Yes.
Obviously, because financial data is very important to private companies, which is understandable. Some of them are public. I know like FaZe are public as well, but even if you go public, it actually just makes your public perception worse by doing that, because you're like, oh, okay, so now we know 100% you're not making money.
Yes.
It's like, okay, cheers, well done. You've just inadvertently fucked yourself by doing that, but it's okay.
By the way, fans always miss that. You know, when fans see that, like, a giant Orcs lost 11 million, I guess they're going to shut down next year. It's like, right, the joke is they have so much money coming in as VC. They're choosing to spend 11 million instead of losing 3 million and having a way smaller squad. Like, actually, the game's sort of inverted in a weird way right now.
Yeah, I think like when it comes to sort of the final stage of the process, it was made very apparent to me and a bunch of owners that not Optics, sorry, Riot are very concerned with the optics of how the selection of the teams would work. As soon as I got told that G2 were not making it, I was like, okay, I know exactly why this is happening, because Riot do not want to partner with teams that have any sort of bad reputation in the slightest. And this is why I think organizations like TSM, G2 both missed out, because
it's obvious.
You like Riot has a history of trying to erode their own past by, sort of, I guess, fixing their little sort of slip ups a few years ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it was just one of those things they've just always tried to sort of make it seem like they're not those types of people anymore. And, we don't have those kinds of people at the company. Spoiler, they still do, but it's fine. This is what I mean. Like, they were very concerned with how, okay, if we chose this team, is it a safe option? As in, oh my God, look, they've been in the game for a while. They've got no major setbacks, no major controversies or anything like that. Yes, okay, that seems quite good. Or we go for potentially a bigger organization, for example, TSM, who have a history of bad press and do not look good from an optics standpoint, because you've got to think, the way Riot would like to make money, this is a business. They are concerned with optics, but they are also concerned with sponsors. And I know for a fact that if G2 would have made it into that league, then sponsors probably could have left. Like, that could have really ruined it. And it's one of those things where whatever you think about the actual incident, as long as the public don't agree, like, you're fucked. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. Like,
that was the thing that really, really annoyed me about this whole thing, was a lot of people were talking about, like, since when can the public decide who your friendships are and you get cancelled over that? It's like, actually, no one has decided who Carlos's friendships are. He can fucking go be friends with Andrew Tate. That's his prerogative. But the point is like, anything, business, politics, until the entire beginning of time has worked this way, where if the general public perception does not agree or does not like what this decision, very public decision has been made, then, and especially if it, in the case of Carlos, like, he did it representing G2. Like, this was entangled to G2. It was not just a private thing that got leaked or anything like that. Like, that will have an impact on the business, and the business will then make a decision based on what that PR assessment is, right? Yeah. And that was the thing that kind of irritated me about this, is like, at this point doesn't actually really matter ultimately what the thing that he did is.
Oh, it's just a response. Yeah, of course.
It's what matters is, like, why might a business choose to make the sort of decision that they did? And I know that we're not going into like a whole debate about like Carlos or whatever, but I think too many people focused on what, like, the social aspect of like whether Carlos is getting cancelled. It's like, actually, that's kind of fucking irrelevant. And Carlos is not going to be kicked out of esports. There's just no way. Like, Carlos will always have an audience. Yes. There will always be people who like him. And there's no way he's just going to walk out of esports. That's just not happening.
By the way, George even said something earlier that's actually a key element as well, which has been really missed, right? Even though, obviously, like on the Four Horsemen episode, we made the grander point of like, well, look, right, you have a pretty rad rep yourself with that exact topic, right? That's actually also why, in the world of PR, they can't even touch someone who is a stink, because it's also going to make people think like, right, imagine someone, like they announced in VCT, G2's in, right? Someone writes an article that's a hit piece about Carlos and G2, but then they mention, and of course Riot's let them in this league, and Riot has their own, like, that's the last thing Riot wants. Again, like George said, they want that to be firmly in the past, moving further away in the past as they move into a bright new future that has nothing to do with that.
This is the whole point. Yeah, this is what they've been trying to do with Valorant, I guess, as an esport entirely. You know, they want to learn from the sins of the past. This has been told to me so many times where it's like, oh, okay, we fucked up this way in League. We fucked up this way in like all these other kinds of different things of the past, where it's like Valorant, we've got a brand new slate, you know, we could do all these kinds of new things, and we don't want it to be tarnished in any way, shape or form. And that is what they're going with. So yeah, I think, again, all it would have taken, I guess, was anybody to make any sort of line where you directly link Riot to Andrew Tate, pretty much. Yes. And I it doesn't matter how the semantics work. Yeah, but this is what I mean. It's like it doesn't matter how difficult or easy it is. If there is a way that is possible, then Riot will try and avoid it at all costs. Yes. Because sponsors will pull out, they will lose money, and their league will be tainted. It's just how it is. And I completely understand why they did it. So
something really important to bear in mind with this as well, which I think a lot of people are either misconstruing or simply not understanding, is that in this instance, the orgs don't own the spots. Riot owns the spots, right? So it's like when they're like, people talk about like orgs being able to sell spots. That won't happen. These are not sellable spots. But also like, you know, like the orgs having some kind of agency in these sorts of things because the orgs own the spots. They don't. They didn't pay for them. That's the whole point of the partnership program. Is it is not a franchise league. Yep. The orgs do not own the spots. They have to be invited. Riot are paying the orgs to be there, and therefore the agency is 100% with Riot. So like people are sort of looking at it through a lens of like how they may be familiar with certain sports leagues or other esports franchises. And how maybe like PR mishaps might be dealt with there, because like ultimately it's in a lot of cases still kind of the org's responsibility to manage that spot. That is simply not the case here. At no point do the orgs that are in the partnership program own that. And I suspect that even if one of those orgs wants to drop out at some point, they will not just be able to sell that spot because they don't own it. Right? Yeah, so it's like you have to look at it through a very different lens.
That's even something I also think is missed, because that is also the crucial difference of the fact it's not a spot you bought for millions. Even though, as certain people did find out in League of Legends, it doesn't matter that you bought it for millions. If they really choose to say you have to sell it or you can't sell it to anyone except this guy, that can happen. But there's a bigger angle, which is because they didn't buy in, you are always at their mercy. So I'll give you an obvious one. I won't mention the name, but if you have any brains, you'll be able to read between the lines. You know, when a certain very controversial figure came back who was a top player earlier this year, and everyone was losing their mind, like, wow, how can he be allowed back in the game? Spoiler, I understood this the second he came back. It's like, oh, they're not stupid. They're not also going to make it look like they're tyrants and go, you can't play this game, get out forever, even though, again, there's actually no like hard evidence to prove what you might have done. What always was implicated to me was this: if he thinks he's getting on one of these teams, he is out of his motherfucking mind. Like, that will, like George says there, when you have a process where it's like, and you're shortlisted now, like, this is all, you don't even need it to be an informal convo. You just have to tell them, and of course you won't be signing player X, will you? And then the person they look at your face and they go, no, of course not. And even if they were thinking about it, it's off the table. And that's just the way, like, that, if you don't know, that's the way inner circle of business works. So there'll be a paper trail of that. He'll never be able to prove that that's what happened and why he wasn't picked up by a team. And basically the joke is he would actually have to be basically like or whoever else is the best player in the world to even have a chance at this point. Because that's the other thing. If you'd already bought your slot for the millions and you're on the hook for years and years, sometimes I've heard those orgs in the other leagues could get a bit cheeky. Like, you could sort of sign someone, you know, they're not going to really like, but it's like, I'll set up like the right timing of when to announce it, or maybe I'll even be cocky and go public with it, and then I'll leave to Riot to deal with the fallout. Like, in this scenario, I don't think that was even on the table. Like, what do you think, George? You know what I'm referring to. Everyone should at this point, but like, that's sort of intimated, right? There's a way to shade that person out no matter what, right?
I mean, are we not allowed to mention his name?
You can mention him if you want. I just don't know if people want to know into like the drama of it. It's obviously Sinatra, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Sinatra is a very interesting one, because obviously, Sinatra is a very popular player.
Sure.
There's a lot of people that message me asking me about, like, oh my God, is Sinatra going to be on a team next year? You know, I mean, I guess logistically, yeah, he's a free agent. I guess he's a restricted free agent, if you want to sort of make the, the term. He's not going to be on a team. I'm sorry, but this is just not how it's... I think the only way he actually ever comes back would be if he leaves Sentinels and joins a team in the Ascension Leagues, which is like the Challengers Leagues, and sort of works his way back up. Because there's not going to be a world where he gets straight back onto a partnered team or back on Sentinels for that matter.
I still don't even know if he'd be allowed in. Like, I will preface this by saying Sinatraa is probably the one instance of a person in esports that I have felt very strongly about not being allowed back. Like, I am very firmly on the anti-Sinatraa train, so I will say that, like, before I say this. But I think the thing is, like, so when all of the accusations came out about Sinatraa and Riot did, like, they gave us
they did like an investigation or something, right. Yeah.
But the thing that you have to consider from Riot's perspective there is, like, Sinatraa was never charged. So, like, there's only so much Riot can do, right? Yeah. And I think that they're in this sort of rock and hard place situation where, okay, sure, they wouldn't want him to necessarily represent their product, but they can't say, like, oh, but you were charged with this criminal act, because he wasn't. Yep. The most that they can do is simply blacklist him. Right. And I honestly think that would probably be what they do, because even if you, in your the depths of your soul, like, really love Sinatraa and you think he's, like, totally innocent and whatever, there are enough people who don't that I think the backlash would...
It's like the Carlos thing again. It's actually unfortunately irrelevant as to whether he did or not. If the perception is he did, and again, you're connecting that shit to Riot Games, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I also want to jump in and say, so I didn't watch the full episode of your Four Horsemen thing, but I watched bits of it. And one thing that I did disagree with is, and by all means correct me if I've just taken the point out of context, but Monty's point about, Riot have kind of had their issues in the past, therefore it's quite rich of them to be sort of trying to put this authority. I'm not super on that train, because I think that, like, okay, like, I understand that Monty's a very big cynic when it comes to Riot, like, that, that's not lost on me, but okay, let's just say you're caught in this huge scandal, like, you do this huge fuck up, like, if you want there to be some improvement in your company culture or in whatever it is, you have to make those steps eventually. Like, sure. you have to enact this sort of, like, these sorts of rules at some point. And yeah, of course, like, anyone can always turn around and be like, oh, but you did, like, X, Y, and Z. And that, sure, yeah, that's true. And I don't think that should ever make anyone off the hook if they've done something, like, in the past like that. But I don't necessarily agree that, like,
I mean, you think they can be rehabilitated, right?
Well, I don't even know, because I think that it's far beyond me, a tiny individual who has worked as a freelancer for this company, to be able to give a comment on, like, the company as a whole, right? I have no corporate background. Yeah. I can't tell you, like, but I do think that with any kind of situation, saying, like, because this entity or this person did something in the past means they can't make a morally sound decision in the future, or a morally good decision in the future. I think that is sort of like, that traps companies or people in this sort of place where it's like, okay, well, what do they do then?
Well, I mean, I would say
if you're going to allow them to make if you're going to crucify them when, like, they make decisions that in theory are going to be beneficial to people that they have maybe hurt in the past, then what's the point in them ever trying to make any improvements?
Oh, I would say, by the way, even Riot Games, although I am very fucking, like, hesitant to grant companies, just entire companies and brands, human status and treat them like they're individual humans. Like, spoiler, these companies only care about money, profit, and they literally sometimes financially, they have to only care about that. That's actually where the American corporate system's set up, believe it or not. So basically, the one thing I would say is this, though. I do think even Riot Games, the devil should always have his due, even Riot Games should not be held to their worst moment ever, forever, and not allowed to ever change. The problem I would say is this, and maybe this is in a separate part I would say the main crux of it for people like Richard and for Monty on that particular topic isn't just like, true, it is the case that you can just go, well, you did it in the past. Like, you know, you can sort of do that. But I think their main issue is this. What makes them not believe it's in good faith that Riot has changed and is making progress is that not a single person who was above the level of a peon was basically fired. That's the main issue, is that the things people were making claims at went really high up, including, by the way, sometimes just name checking, like founders of the company, head executives. So what the problem I have is this. It doesn't. What's really weird about that, I made this point on the show, so I'll make it very brief, is normally it's actually just a very cynical business strategy that at a minimum you offer someone up to the dogs. In politics, what you tend to do is you look who could have been vaguely associated. I won't say certain scandals, but you could guess. You pick the least important guy, but he's still a key figure. You sort of go, he was a rogue actor. We didn't. What were you doing down there? Even though obviously
he's watching British politics all the time.
That's why. So I'm listening. Yeah,
you pick like someone from the cabinet who's like in a low, low ministerial position.
And then the other thing is, right, you hand them over exactly for this reason, so they become the lightning rod of abuse. By the way, behind the scenes, you probably even go, here's like a golden handshake, loads of money, like share, keep them all, but just take the abuse basically for the next few years. Maybe you can even come back later. But the problem I had is this. At a minimum, I think there should have been two people like that. I'm not going to name the names now, obviously. What I mean is this, because I don't know who those people are. The two people should be this. There should be one person high up enough that potentially they didn't stop this culture or they themselves were instrumental in it. That goes without saying to me, at a minimum, a scapegoat. And then the other one is this, and this is the other point we made on the show, is because there was the follow-up detail that they then basically tried to like play House of Cards with the ongoing like actual lawyer suit against them, trying to mess with the lawyers and the amount of money. There also should have been someone for that, because essentially whoever brainstormed that, whoever made a big whiteboard like the mafia style, like if we get to this person and this lawyer, that guy has to be fired. Like, because those two things, in my opinion, would show exactly what you're saying, which I would agree with, is like, right, at a minimum, here's like a gesture to the public of goodwill. We're cleaning house, we're getting rid of all that. This guy was the one who led the charge. This guy was the one who, totally is a rogue actor, messed with the people who were going to cost us money. At least if you do that, I would feel like, okay, at least you've given us something. But in this case, I think the bad thing is they really do just want to be like, that was ages ago, man. Like, we've all changed and matured since then, which is like, who can know that? And the problem is, as you say, if people have a long track record of not liking Riot or Riot not liking them, it's very easy to go, actually, I'm not going to forgive you, Riot. I'm just going to keep waiting until you improve. Right, anyway, one thing I would come back into, because I've got a good angle for someone here, because I've got, believe it or not, I know some things that people don't know that I can talk about in Valorant without having to know the game Valorant. So one that might shock people is this. First of all, if you only follow Valorant, you might be shocked of like America's, you're probably cynical and think, right, that will probably be like what, 7 NA orgs, and then, you can have like Leviathan and Fury, a couple of them come in. But why, wait a minute, why are there all these teams? And it isn't, by the way, just that Loud won the champions. That isn't it. Like, I think they would be in anyway. Here's the team that will shock you. It's MIBR, right? You're going to go, who the fuck is MIBR? They're not even that. This is what you have to understand. The Brazilian fan base in Counter-Strike is absurd. Like, famously, you could literally have, I'm not joking, when Na'Vi was the best team in the world, not that long ago, last year, from CIS region, which was the other major region of viewership spike, if you had Na'Vi against MIBR when they had a bad CS team, that would be the match that had the most viewership in the whole tournament. Not like Na'Vi versus like the second best European team in the final. It would be like a round of 16 game between like MIBR or any Brazilian team and then CIS. So essentially, because MIBR the brand, obviously people will notice the Immortals Gaming Club behind them. First of all, they have access to VC where they are in every single franchise league they can be, and they could be in any they want to be. They could be in them all, CDL, all, OWL, LC, any of them they want. So first of all, they have access to the money. The business side is squared away completely. And then secondly, they want this absurd viewership. They want that, like, if you look how many teams are from South America there, especially from Brazil, there's 3 Brazilian orgs at least. Like, this is just a strategy to get loads of viewership. The problem is, that's also where, if you're a fan, the GOUD can't bring that viewership. Like, it doesn't matter how good they are, even if they were the best team. Sorry, there are teams out there that would not keep. So that's not even cynical. It's like you said on Twitter, Gio, I noticed, which is like, you have to also primarily judge the business angle. Like, that's what you're doing. This partnership isn't.
What it is.
Let's get the best lineup. It's like, let's get the best business partners and then hope they sign the best players.
It's not like, let's all like hold hands around the circle and think about, like, people's feeling. Like, it is a business. What do people think this is? Like, that's the thing that really got me, irritated the fuck out of me, was that people are like, all they care about is the money. It's like, are you aware of what you're looking at? Like, it's a business made by a massive company. But no, it's true with, like, I mean, Brazil has very impassioned fans. And Valorant's very fortunate in the fact that the Brazilian region is just so happened to be quite fucking good.
Yeah.
Especially just this early on in the esports.
Oh, that's so perfect, by the way, that Loud did win. Like, I even said, if you notice on Twitter,
Yeah.
when it got to the last 4 champions, I was like, dude, this is like scripted or something. So you have the Korean team finally breaks through. The Brazilian team's going there. Optic was the best team anyway, and then FPX the best EU team the whole time. Like, this is like someone just set it up to make the game end on that era and come into the partnership. It's like all the storylines are there, in it.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. Like, I think that's like the cool thing about Valorant is that a lot of the regions are very balanced, like from an international perspective anyway, which is it makes it so that you can kind of sense the value in a lot of these partnership selections, regardless of whether it's like, oh, 100 Thieves, they're like this huge brand in NA. It's like, well, actually, I can look at someone like Furia and I'm like, yeah, I totally see that.
It even makes sense if you think about the other regions. Like, for example, the aforementioned year with that story that, like, the Bleed organization or whatever, the one that had Legia that we had on a past episode. By the way, even if they weren't actually going to sign him, that's just called genius PR, because what you've just told the world is we can spend $1 million on a player import, and we potentially will. Like, the fact that you even are able to do that, that's why you're in the league as well. That's why, actually, again, I'm not taking the GOUD or whatever. Like, and I even think that's exciting, because what people are missing is this. There will be some players and teams and cores that maybe it's not the deal they want and it's not the best team, so they will go in the Ascension League and be like, you know what, we'll prove we're really good. Like, potentially those players can also then go to the other regions as well. If they have money, you can bring in some superstar player who's sick of trying to wait to get in with a spot in America, so he can just go for a year into the APAC. Remember, it's still going to be a route to bigger tournaments still. It'll be like the equivalent of being the Korean in League of Legends who come to LCS, right?
I will say it's definitely, I think it was smart for orgs like Gen.G and T1 to apply for Pacific, even though they've had NA rosters in Valorant.
Oh yeah, I said this at the start. I said it's completely outrageous to even think you're going to get a chance in NA. It's never going to happen. But yeah, they were both very adamant that they were going to get into North America, and I was just like, yeah, it's just not a chance, is it? Because I mean, the good thing that Riot did was like, during the application process, they were like, you can have this main region that you can apply to, but then there's also a second one, just in case you don't get into that one.
You mean it's like the safety school?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they've done it. So it was like,
I love it. Yeah, it's great.
You know, that's what I mean. They said it to like teams like, well, G2, for example, was one they were like, oh, we really want North America. If we can't get North America, let's go EMEA. So obviously they sort of kind of fucked themselves both ways anyway. But it's like for T1, for example, I remember I was speaking to people and they were just saying to me, some of the people at T1 were very hopeful they were going to stay in North America, obviously because most of them are based in North America, and they were like, "Oh, I really want to keep my job." And I was like, "Come on, man! Like, you got to be realistic here. Like, Riot is a business. They're not gonna. Why the fuck would they like potentially ruin?" They're like massive. You have a massive fan base in Korea, right? Why would you ever want to take that away from the region? It's just bad practice, and it's never going to happen, is it?
I've definitely wondered for a while, like, how much do Riot, in a lot of their decision making with this stuff, how much do they value like the pre-established ideas that are in League, because I don't know how much of an overlap there is between League and Valorant fans, and I don't know if Riot want to try and sell Valorant to League fans, because obviously if that's something they value a lot, then having Gen.G and T1 in Pacific makes a lot of sense, because those are like two of the best Korean teams in League of Legends. And I've been curious because, yes, they're very different types of games, so maybe there isn't a huge audience overlap, and I genuinely don't know. And I would love to know, like, I mean, I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you think that is something that they think a lot about? Because then in that case, why did they give G2 a North American spot and not an EMEA slot? Like,
okay. Yeah, hit me, George. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think so in my opinion, I think there was a risk of oversaturation, because when you have T1 and Gen.G, for example, yes, they are, I guess, sizable in North America, but they do have the majority of their fan bases in Korea. Now, if you're Riot, you obviously look at this and you think, okay, realistically in APAC, we're not going to have the biggest organizations like that compared to EMEA in North America and America. Sorry, we're not going to have, you know, the Louds, the Optics, or not even the Optics, I guess, you know, the Cloud9s, the Sentinels. We're not going to have these guys. So we do need front runners that have big fan bases to headline this league. Otherwise, I guess we're just left with like big Japanese teams and like, do you know what I mean? Like it's not enough to go with, you know what I mean? Like it really isn't enough. Whereas I think the G2 thing is a bit different, because if you took G2 out of EMEA, yes, there would have been a bit of it would have hit the league, I guess, like, economically and viewership wise, but it wasn't going to do like big, massive like dint in the league, because you have K-Corp, you have Vitality, you have Team Liquid, you have Fnatic. I'm sorry, but they would have found a decent replacement either way. And the fact that they're bringing other organizations like K-Corp and Vitality into these leagues, I think is like ingenious. Spanish orgs as well, like Koi.
Money at anything. So
I think it was very smart, and I think that's why Riot, I think, subconsciously or maybe consciously, did not want to risk oversaturating their own markets, and they needed headliners, they needed front runners. Otherwise, what's the point if you're a Western viewer that likes these teams? Why the fuck would you watch the APAC League? There's no point, because you got to remember the APAC League in terms of viewership is not the biggest. It's not the best when you compare it to Americas, I guess, for example. So what better way than sort of centralizing that fan base once more and having those big front runners? You've got T1, for example, in League of Legends that have been there for years, Gen.G as well. You've got these sort of notable organizations that people already are aware of in the West, and it's like, okay, now it's in APAC. We could potentially get some super teams here, some big funding, some much needed money that APAC doesn't really have compared to Americas. You know what I mean? So I think that was a lot of factors, but I think realistically it does just come down to sort of risking oversaturation in one of the markets when you could have realistically done a better decision elsewhere. And also it comes down to the fact that there just wasn't enough slots in North America, I think, or in the Americas region, sorry. There really wasn't enough slots for how many teams wanted to be in, and Riot needed to choose the right teams. If you're a team that has a very, very, very large fan base in Korea, but then somewhat of a big fan base in North America, like, come on, it's not a hard decision, I guess, to make, really, is it? So I completely understand why they did it, and I guess there is kind of an overlap, I guess, with like league viewers, but I think it more comes down to like subconscious sort of Western beliefs of, oh, T1, Gen.G, yeah, I know these guys are really big Korean organizations. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm also curious, like, how much of like, or how much of Riot expecting there to be a large portion of people to be like, T1, that's who Faker plays for. I'm going to go watch the Valorant Pacific League. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you need headliners for an APAC league, yeah, T1 Gen.G, 100%. Yeah. I think it's a no-brainer, and I think it's very smart. I've said this for months. I said, and people were like, "Oh no, they've been investing heavily in North America." I was like, doesn't matter. Like, come on, it's a business, and I really don't think that. I think it would have been naive to suggest that T1 or Gen.G would have got into America. So I think that's my opinion anyway. I think it's just a risk of oversaturation. So yeah, I think it was smart what Riot did in the end.
On the G2 angle, I actually have a little bit of info there that people might not be aware of, which is when they first brought franchising to League of Legends, it started in LCS a year before they rebranded EU LCS into LEC. And during that time period, people won't know this because it was revealed on talk shows, but it wasn't like a thing that like everyone knows and remembers. G2 wanted to be in LCS and have tried it to get into LCS out of LEC. Now, what people won't understand there is, but why? Like, they're the best team in the world at one point in time. Because here's the problem that you've always had in Europe. No one's ever cracked this one, basically. That's why, if you notice, it's all just based on like some super rich guy is behind Koi or whatever, it's like those stories always like that in Europe. It's always like the oligarch type guy. It's never that like they just have all the biggest sponsors like Team Liquid or Cloud9. So basically the problem is this: because of all these regional sponsor budgets in Europe, whereas in America it's like you have American Intel. If you're like the top team for them, you get like millions, whereas maybe you get like a fraction of that because you're with like Intel Germany if you're some team from that region, Schalke or something, or you're G2, maybe you have the Spanish angle and you go with that team. Basically the premise for G2 is they've already already sort of overperformed coming from Europe, being able to go up against the massive Team Liquids of the world. So their whole perspective was like, we want out of the kids table and we want on the big one, because people like Carlos were thinking, mate, you put me in NA and let me walk in those rooms and I'll take all their lunch. I'm going to take all their deals. I'm going to scale to the biggest level, because obviously he had these very grand delusions. What's mad is Carlos once told me years ago in an interview, and it sounded mad at the time, and I even thought, like, calm down, mate. But it's now you realise when you see the valuations of these teams, one day this might be real. He famously said, I don't want to be like those teams in Europe where like a football team buys you. Think of like PSG or Schalke or whatever. He goes, I want it to be where I buy Real Madrid one day. And obviously at the time you were like, homie, shut the fuck up. You have a League of Legends team. But like, if you see how it's all scaling up, and that, by the way, how football sort of stalled and they have to just bring in money from
next venture.
The joke is like, yeah, it's almost like the premise, right? So
he's going to have to sell his stocks or sell his shares from G2 and then go buy Real Madrid.
And then the other angle is, that's the G2 one. That's why, to me, they potentially want to be NA, I imagine. And then the other one is on the Koreans, right? First of all, again, if you want to talk about like made men who were just like pre-approved, you know, like that thing, like you've got a pre-approved loan already, even though I don't know who you are. I've just sent you this email. Obviously T1 was, because they even started cynically building the Korean team way before, without even having all the players. And here's a little gem I'll just drop for you. George might know this. Cloud9 played it off, sort of like, we're going to make some changes and all the. I've heard they had no say in that, and the Koreans were just leaving anyway. And it was one of those ones where it's like they had to just like make it look optically good on the way out. Like, oh no, we actually wanted to pivot to, like more North America. Yeah, right. They were like your best fucking players. Like some of those people were like the exact players built around. And then secondly, that's also why it's genius, in my opinion, for these orgs to go to Pacific region. One, they probably don't even have to compete with the same kind of salaries as these other major regions now, because the game isn't as big. Two, there's only 3 orgs that are in the Pacific region that are huge League of Legends people. There's Gen.G, T1 and DRX is the other one, right? Basically, that means there's only 15 slots there. I mean, 18 if you add the subs, right? They have the pick of the litter. All the Koreans, they can just take. And if you know how Koreans do think, it's the Korean players, Gio, who are thinking like you're saying about Faker. A Korean player, it doesn't matter that T1 isn't like the best team in Valorant. They are really thinking like, you mean I can be in the same org as Faker? I can be in the org that Boxer was in. That's real. Like, that is a big deal to Koreans. Like, that alone would be a reason to stay. And if you don't know, Koreans actually are notoriously loyal in that regard, as in, you've heard the stories where they go to the Chinese team. Not if, like, T1 want you, mate. If T1 want you, you're going to join T1, because, again, that's, like, the history. And right now, Gen.G is the best squad. DRX has been a pretty good squad for years. So I think that's also just, it makes sense for everyone in that regard. And also, when I look at the teams like Zeta from Japan, like, listen, if you can go head-to-head with T1 in money, like, God bless you. I don't think you're going to be able to personally. I think they get whatever they want, and and if you get Japanese players, you're not even trying to compete. It's actually the maddest region for that reason. If you think about Geo, like in the EMEA, in theory, all the players can go amongst each other. It's really hard. It's going to be super competitive. If you're going to have a Japanese team and we're 3 Korean teams, I think we're all right, homie. You can just do whatever you want. You can be over in the corner. You know what I mean?
I think as well, like especially. I think Koreans at Valorant as well, I think have proven that they are. I mean, Japanese teams have as well, definitely. But I think there is a lot of talent, I guess, in Korea that is very sort of untapped. And I know that Gen.G, Gen.G and T1 are both trying to build these kinds of Korean super teams, which makes sense. Some of the players that they still have on their roster, for example, T1 still have, Zeta, Munchkin. They are very, very good players. And I think it's like, I think they are trying to sort of build these kinds of big teams where they have these big, amazing, like great Korean players so that they could just be like, okay, we'll just steamroll this league and immediately be like, okay, now we've got a champion spot. Oh, now we've got a master spot. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. I can understand that is a smart decision for you to do that. And that's why, in my opinion, I would have thought that there would have been more teams that would have actually tried to go to the APAC region, because it's like you have less salaries and you have quite a decent size like pool of players to pick from. And if you're a big organization with a big history, these guys will want to join you. They're not like it's like a lot of people forget that it's like each region gets the same amount. Well, usually they get the same amount of like slots available. Sometimes the EMEA and North America gets a few more, but it's like you're still going to be included in these international events. So it's like, if you're a big organization, I don't know why you didn't try and go for APAC, because it just seems like, first of all, it's an easier region. If you're like a really big organization with loads of money, you can just get all the best players. Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, obviously, in theory, it sounds a lot easier than what it actually might be, but, you know, it's just like...
It is interesting, though. Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, because they've got, like, what is it? Is it Global, who are the Indian one and stuff like that? So it's like
Global Esports, yeah.
So it's like, I mean, I had never heard of them before. I don't know what like games
they're very big in India. Yeah, I know that.
But right, this is the point I was going to say. Right, is like, while you can say that and be like, oh, you know, there are all these really valuable like Western organizations that could have gone for Asia Pacific. Actually, like them picking up a team, giving one of the slots, for example, to an Indian organization who are really well known in India, you tap into like there's a fucking billion people there.
Oh yeah,
like
100%.
That's massive. So like I think they've done a very smart job at actually divvying out the Pacific region organizations over quite a large geographical portion of Asia Pacific. And we all saw that tweet that was like, you know, no OCE teams got in, but like, how valuable do you think an OCE team is actually going to be compared to like an Indian team?
Oh, their businesses are tiny compared to them.
Oh yeah,
right. It's like we as Westerners like maybe more you know, familiar with like OCE esports and stuff because like it's kind of seen as a pseudo Western region, right? And actually under Riot esports, it is lumped in with NA generally. But like when you actually consider the value that these organizations bring to the parts of the world that they're representing, there's way more in that, and there's probably significantly more money as well. It really actually does not surprise me that there is no OCE orgs in it, because like, what do you think OCE are gonna give to the league compared to like some really popular like Indian org, or like I don't know, you've got like Singaporean, you've got Thai, you've got like all of these different ones here. It just covers such a wide spread.
I will say one thing though, and it's a bit of a side note, a bit of a deviation, but Riot have been absolutely fucking OCE for so long now in Valorant. It's ridiculous. You remember the whole fucking LCQ debacle in North America where it was like we couldn't get these teams in from OCE, and this was going to be the big event where it was
21.
Yeah, it was like, oh, this was going to be the big event where OCE can finally prove themselves and show the world how good they are. And it's just like, oh, sorry, yeah, no, you're not coming.
Turned out it was the no chance qualifier for them. Exactly.
Yeah.
By the way, I'll tell you what. I'm just as pure speculation. I've already I did the Control F, and he's just listed as a free agent. Just put two and two together. Get ready. They're already preparing the video with that music. Coming home, I'm coming home. Sire player is obviously going to be on one of these teams, surely. Like this guy's not built this name. Yeah, that's what I mean. He's going to surely be on one of those three Korean teams. It's just logical at this point, right?
Yeah, 100%.
It's a slam dunk move.
Yeah, this was a conversation that we did have on Valoranting, because we were talking about how people in his role, there are so many of them in NA that like the likelihood of him retaining that spot in NA is very low. But like go to Korea, and suddenly like that's a bit different. I think that would be the smartest thing for him, is to leave North America.
Obviously, the joke would be, because in theory, NA is supposed to be a better region, right? He could arrive then, and they were all, tell us, Sire player, what are all the practice methods? What advanced systems do they have? And then the joke would be, when he'd explain it, they'd be like, so they practice a third less than us. They're all watching anime and playing other gear. Like, what's going on? Like, I bet it's like the craziest stories of like a sailor coming back from the sea or whatever to that. Like, my life, what a world.
Yeah, I bet they're all so fucking gassed to it. Oh, it's like, how's it? Yeah, the money was great, and it was, it was so good. There were so many fans. Oh, yeah, we just played at like 6 p.m.
I know.
Oh, yeah, all right, fair enough. Yeah, we scrimmed for like 3 hours and got off. Oh, cheers, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's all right. Just qualified for a major LAN as well. It's like, oh, yeah, that's all right. Most of us here are sitting like on fucking pennies, and you just go to this region and do fuck all, and there you go. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's that.
By the way, the other topic.
MCU's skin is crueling.
Oh, it is. Here's the topic I want to bring up now, which is on all these past episodes that we've ever brought up the dreaded name Sentinels, which just summons the demons into all your fucking reply section and everything, right? the one topic that the reason why everyone had to go in circles and make the same criticisms because they never fucking changed players except for that fake one when they brought Shroud in and pretended like he was a real player, which is fair play. You know what? At that point, you weren't a competitive team. Just do whatever you do. The WWE, but whose music is that? Shroud? Like, fair enough. I get what they were doing with that, right? And again, they were always a slam dunk to get in if you know who's behind them. Because the real problem Sentinels has is this: if people don't know, they're not like the name Sentinels isn't in other esports games. By the way, it's also such a stupid name to name a Valorant team after when we're all going to have to say the word Sentinels in other fucking context in every conversation. But that's by the by, like just NA teams in it. So we're bringing it back. Here's the angle I think's mad. Everyone's so burned out on speculating that they should change players. They're missing that, like, they have cleaned house. They've kept, like, the biggest names you had to keep and the most obvious people. But now there are all the spots that people wanted. So potentially, assuming they actually have the money and now they are ready to go ham, because there's also probably a world where they just didn't want to make the big changes early like this year. Like, why bother? You know, you're coming into this anyway. So you wait until this point. Now, surely this is where they're going to try and be number one again and make the... So... Give us some speculation here. Like, what's out there, George? What's possible? What do you think?
What's out there, I guess, right now is that the only, I guess, contracted player to play for next year is Dapper. That's it.
Okay.
So, realistically, right now, Sentinels technically only have one player to go into next year with.
Do you actually think there's a world in that scenario by what you're saying there? Like, obviously, I just took it for granted. Like, Tens is definitely it, but is there a world where he's, like, shopping himself and maybe he doesn't know if he's there or not?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because Tens is, Tens has this really cool angle where, yes, he's like a good player, I guess. I mean,
he's a very good player, but yeah, sure.
I think he's not the best anymore. Yeah. Like the jet nerfs hurt him, etc., whatever. You could talk about him for an hour, but it's like he has a massive brand, and realistically, that is very important when you want to, like, if you're deciding to get new players in, and it's like, oh, this guy can potentially help us bring in sponsors, and that could potentially negate some of his salary because we can get away with paying him this much because we can go to a sponsor and say, oh, look, we have this guy. We can do like an ad or some shit like that. You know what I mean? Like, so that makes complete sense. I know from speaking to some of the people inside Sentinels, they really want to win. They're sick of this whole like facade of, or this whole sort of label of them being a streamer team and not really caring and not really practicing. And I know from some of the people that they're going to get in or they're trying to get in, there's no sort of room for that, I guess, label anymore.
So they're putting the pedal to the floor. They're going ham on this.
Yeah, they will 100%. And if you are somebody like Tens and Shazam, whose contracts are expiring, and yes, you have a legacy with this team. I'm like, yeah, okay, I understand it'll be very big when you both leave the organization, but I'm sorry, but things don't last forever. And realistically, you two have been a hamper of this team and have potentially caused more bad things to happen to this team than you actually would have thought. Like, I'm sorry, no. Okay, me personally, I've never been a big fan of Shazam and Tens. I think they're both good players, but I think I don't think, there's just so much I could say about both of them, but it's like I just can't.
I was the person on the desk who was like, I think I was the first person to really like give some criticism to Sentinels on one of the international broadcasts because everyone else was still like with their little heart eyes, and I just took it as an opportunity to take the piss because I thought it was fucking hilarious.
Yeah, I can completely understand it because there are players in this region that really want to win. And they would give an arm and a leg to be under this organization. And you have these two people that don't give a fuck. Like,
I don't think there's
bit of a hyperbole, but do you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, like, it's just, I completely understand.
It's because it said hyperbole.
I understand it. Okay, sorry.
You have to understand, just tune your ear in. He's basically doing like a bad Tom Hardy impression his whole life, isn't he? Going, all right, Max, what, bloody hell, what's going on?
Look, I'm sorry. Okay, look, sometimes some of the things that I learned when I was a kid, I didn't go to a very good school. Do you know what I mean? Like, some things I didn't learn pronunciations on properly.
Exactly.
Look, realistically, the point sounded really cool when I said it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm going to continue.
He wanted to get his soundbite off. You have to understand, Gio.
Exactly. No, sorry.
I know.
But like, it's what I mean. Like Shazam and Tens, I think it'll be very smart to get off of this roster as soon as possible. Like, I think their tenure's done. This is it now. You get a completely fresh sort of slate, new players in, new in-game leader in, new coaching staff, everything. And then you can go balls to the wall and you can actually like face off against some of these massive teams and actually potentially win, which is something Sentinels haven't been doing for a very long time. So yeah, I don't know. I've always had this opinion where Sentinels are one of the, well, arguably the biggest organization in this region. And there are some of these young players and some of these even experienced players that would give so much to be under this organization and would actually put the work in properly to, to make this roster the best that it could be. And I think now Sentinels have realized that, and they are actually trying to be quite aggressive in the market and get some of these players that,
they're surely the obvious team that's going on for FNS and some other Optic players. Surely. That just seems the obvious move to go for, right?
I have definitely heard things about how much Sentinels are willing to invest in getting a good team and who they may have been willing to invest in. So I've definitely heard that about them really wanting to go hard. I do find it interesting. So I mean, for Shaz, I don't see him getting a role anywhere. When you consider the IGLs and stuff.
No, even do I.
So I do wonder if he will then be picked up as a content creator, and in that instance, is he going to stay with Sentinels, but as a content creator, or would he try and go through Ascension, or is he going to go somewhere else? And kind of the same with Tens, I guess. He seems a bit young to just kind of give up on the pro thing, but I agree with you where I don't see Tens as the way that I see Tens is he is so resource reliant. Whereas there are a lot of players who aren't as much as he is. So I think with Tens, where you see Sentinels play the most poorly is where they're not all funneling their resources into him. And I just don't know how much of an asset that is to teams who are trying to build, and if that's going to be the first thing, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets tryouts and stuff. I just don't know if I see him becoming the starting entry.
Yeah. And also, spoiler, if you ask for a fuckload of money for a player that teams don't necessarily want, you're not going to have a good chance of actually getting him on another team.
That's also a really sad thing. I always feel bad for players who get stuck behind buyouts, because that happened in Rainbow Six. There were two players on G2, on the legendary G2 team, one of whom got to have the retirement that he really deserved, and the other didn't get that. The other kind of GOAT, if you will, didn't get that because when he moved over to Vitality, they set his buyout so high that when they benched him, he couldn't even go and do anything else himself. It was he knew that by the time his contract was up, he would have been out of playing long enough that he was not going to be picked up as an unrestricted free agent. And he knew his buyout was so high that it wasn't going to be bought. And so he was kind of just forced out. And it was really fucking sad because he deserved to have a real retirement. And I just hate the idea of that. I think that if an org knows they don't want a player, by all means try and get some money out of them. I don't think it's a bad thing to have a buyout. But also, if you're doing it to an extent where you're not going to get that money for them and you are actively harming that player's chance at having a career, and you could be ending their career by having a buyout that high, then I think that's on the org, and I think that's quite cruel.
One thing I want to ask, by the way, and throw out there, obviously, if there's anything to it, George, you can let me know, right? From my perspective, I think the most underrated aspect of Valorant from the year I followed it was it took teams so long to figure out that Optic isn't the best just because they have Ye. It's because they have FNS as well. You notice the people. Actually, I think IGL, by the way, is the best role to transition as far as I can tell. Angel, it's across the board. Steel was there. So the name I want to throw out is Steel. Is Steel actually going to be left out? Is he someone you think people are going for? Is he maybe in the mix for these teams?
I mean, for Ascension, yeah, I guess. Why not? Sure, you can go for Steel.
But he's not a high target for the teams that are already in.
I mean,
he hasn't shown anything for ages.
That's what I mean. From what I know, the majority of the big teams, the Cloud9s, the Sentinels, have already got their dedicated in-game leader at this point. And some of them still have them. I guess 100 Thieves. I guess the real big question mark, I guess, would be Stella. But there was even there was even talks of Stella being replaced. But now it's Stella's not being replaced. So it's okay, I don't really know what's going on there. But it's I think Stella's a good enough player to keep in that role, but there are other in-game leaders that are not going to get the nod as well. That it seems, I guess, at this moment in time, obviously things could still change. We've got another like 15 days or whatever. Xander as well is another player. He's a really, really good in-game leader, a good fragging in-game leader who could potentially be without one of these partnered slots. So I think there's going to be a lot of players that will miss out, and inevitably there will be a lot of in-game leaders that miss out. And it's just it sort of comes down to, if you're not the tier like SSS plus of in-game leader, I don't think you're really going to be able to get on one of these teams. So yeah, and obviously you got to factor in some of these other these other things like buyouts and some of these other things like player dynamics and how they work well with each other. And I completely understand teams not wanting to potentially have steal because of obviously. It's just there's a lot of things that goes into picking a player, and there's a lot of I can't say I've ever personally played with Steel, but it's just one of those things where it's like I've spoken to people who are like, yeah, I don't really want to play with this guy, and I'd prefer to play with this guy though.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some times where I've spoken to players and we're like, yeah, I'd rather play with someone who's actually worse. But
it's really interesting. Like a player who kind of had that reputation until he got onto the team that he's currently on was Marved. Like when Marved went over to Envy on loan from FaZe, there was a whole lot of like, there are a lot of people who don't really like him, but like, I don't remember who it was on the roster that he was already like buddies with, but they're like, he's got a buddy on the roster, so maybe it's fine. And obviously Marved has fucking flourished on, not always in his own individual performance, but just as a constituent part of that roster, he's flourished. So yeah, it really does sometimes just like come down to finding the right group of people.
Yeah, I think Marved is very interesting because he's a very, very good player, and I think he's probably one of the best like controllers in the world, I guess you could argue, definitely. So I think he slot into the Optic roster very well, and I think it's another one of those where player dynamics do sort of help the players themselves, like the inter relationships these players have. Are very good. They obviously all previously come from CS. They've got a long time of knowing each other, and again, it all comes down to these sort of clicks again, where potentially it's a bad thing in the future, but right now it's like it's going to flourish and it's going to be so good. It's like spoiler alert: in a few years' time, it's not going to be that good. But anyways, right now it's doing okay, and I think I completely understand why they got him, and they have been playing very well with him, and I completely understand. There has been some interest in Marved, I know, during this off-season period, but I think it would be a very big miss if he didn't get on a partner team. And this is just another side note, by the way, it's a bit of another tangent about what these people have been speculating. It's like, he won't get on a partner team because of the past allegations of him match fixing. Sure. I'm just like, come on, mate. Like, half the fucking scene would be out of a job if we use those allegations. Like, I know some of these fans don't really understand that Marv wasn't the only one accused.
Oh, of course not.
We've got
at that level, especially the joke was everyone was doing it. Yeah,
everyone was fucking doing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, almost every single like former like semi-professional CS:GO player you could even think of was like maybe even involved or knew somebody that was involved. Like it's ridiculous how deep the rabbit hole actually goes. So it's like, using that logic, then none of your favorite players would ever get on any of these teams.
Yampy wouldn't be. I mean, I know it wasn't match fixing for him, but like Yampy certainly wouldn't be around.
Yeah, of course. So this is. I think that angle is really stupid.
By the way, the one NA team, like, because here's the thing: the NRG one, like I said, I just knew if like the backing of that team, like put it this way, I'd done an interview with that main guy, that bald guy from the team. Like, he actually literally worked like under Steve Jobs at Apple and stuff.
Oh, Andy Miller.
Yeah, he's some guy who's like fucking ascended, mate.
The main bald guy.
I don't give a fuck, mate. I don't remember the names. He's like he's on Elysium, and we're just all the peons on the planet that we like all the shit basically. So he was already going to make it. So NRG, I assume, will get like keep a couple of players going. The one that's mad to me, because it has to just be business things and other relations. It's got to be evil geniuses. Like, they weren't even a fucking relevant team. So the mad thing with them is surely they're not keeping that lineup. Surely most of those players are going.
Oh, I fully expect them to. Oh.
You would think that they would actually get rid of like almost everyone, considering the amount of talent available.
Yeah, right. Why not? Scoop everyone up.
Yeah, it's a completely logical thing to assume. But as of right now, they're not making any major moves at all. And I was very confused. Okay. I think right now, I know that they're actually practicing, and I think one player might not be in, but it's like that could just be potentially because he missed a scrim or something like that, and there might not be anything in that. I mean, if you were like a fucking LEC, fucking I don't know, whatever the fuck, then yeah, you might as well report it. But it's like it's not how these things work. Sorry, sort of side note there, but obviously, I completely understand that like. Evil geniuses want to go this whole route, and I know they've seen success in like the LCS with like Danny and all these kinds of like academy players, where it's like, oh,
of all
they're
the
actually really good, you know. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I mean, you know, he was doing very well, all right. From
yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he was like an academy prospect, right? And he was like coming through, and he was doing all kinds of good things, and. That's kind of similar to what evil geniuses have been trying to paint themselves as because they.
Do you think they're going to do this this is just going to be the company?
That's what
ethos?
They're trying to do. Yeah,
right.
I think they're trying to sort of bring through this kind of the next level of talent and the next the next players that are going to be picked up for the Sentinels and the the Cloud9s of the world, and it's just like the actual roster is not bad because they were beating some of these top. So I can't remember who they beat, but I remember they were beating some of the top rosters when they were actually playing during the regular season. But they were never able to sort of reach the the international level. Like they were never able to sort of qualify for Masters or anything like that. But like they're really not making any moves, and I think. Again, there are several factors obviously to consider, but I think they are really trying to go for this whole, we have this like underdog roster, all these other big teams are making these big moves. And it's like, we've got some of these smaller players that you guys might not know, but are actually really good. And, kind of like the next players coming through to the process. Like, I can understand that angle, but you're one of the 5 North American teams. And you're going for that angle? Like, I can understand if there was like 10 teams or whatever from North America. Yeah. It's like, there are hundreds of players that could potentially be on this roster and deserve to,
Oh, by the way, that whole angle, which players, like, you see the Optic players themselves were wiling about this on Twitter, where, like, essentially, some of them were even jokingly, like, lashing out at other players that have made it in that potentially shit who they're friends with, right? Like, how can I be not in? I'm way better than you. Like, if you think that's going to stop now that we do the free, you haven't even thought this through. I can tell you, because the actual model this is closest to is CSGO. Aside from Flashpoint, the project I was with, that aren't franchise leagues in CSGO. What you have is exactly this. There's no Valve doesn't do what Riot does. It's essentially the tournament organizers. So Blast and ESL have their own partnership programs, and if you're in the partnership program, it's very similar to this. You just get into the main part of the league, and you have like a million chances to qualify for the next stage. But what they do, because they're smart, is that not everyone you partner with. So I'll give you an example. Blast at one point initially partnered with like Complexity because they have the massive business interest in Dallas, but they didn't partner with like Fnatic and Mouse Sports, who had like 2 of the top 5 teams in the world at the time, and obviously Fnatic like is Counter-Strike if you know the history of the game. So that was considered really scandalous. Well, what they did is they were like, oh no, don't worry, because you guys might still be really good, and obviously we still want to benefit from you playing the tournament. We'll make essentially we'll make a way that you can maybe come in like through the back door and qualify. And in doing so, by the way, this has never ended, because when we went online and now teams who weren't even mega on LAN could do really well, the 2 famous teams was Heroic and Gambit. They were number 1 and number 2 in the world, and they weren't in this Blast thing. So what used to happen for real when Gambit was the best team in the world is they would come through the equivalent of the essentially the Peon League, be the best team in the world, qualify, maybe even win the tournament, and then have to go right back to the Peon League and come back up. So, by the way, some of these top players who do play in the essentially, they might end up on a team that's better than Evil Geniuses or NRG. They might even still be the best player in the world. It's just they'll be on this weird circuit where it's like, by the way, this is also why you want to be in the league, they are always incentivized to eventually hop back over to one of those teams. If you became the best outside of it, you'd love to say stay together, and maybe there's not going to be another slot, is there? They're not going to open that up probably for another year or 2. So in that scenario, the other reason why you want to be the business partner, and also why they want people with money, is so that you just buy up the best talent eventually. Eventually, you hope they all filter into the league, right?
Yeah, that was the whole, like, I'm sure Riot were probably sitting there like, oh, for fuck's sake, why are you not getting, like, these big players, these big names, and you're sort of leaving in some of these players that potentially maybe don't deserve to be there. So it's like, well, I guess when you compare them to some of the players that potentially might miss the partnered league, it's like, I'm sure they're actually, I'm sure that there is some sort of, like, I guess, I wouldn't say anger, but I think there is like a bit of a, because Riot wants to make money. And it's like, realistically, if Evil Geniuses are doing this thing where not only are they, first of all, probably the least popular North American team actually like already, or I guess even in the entire Americas League, I guess you could argue. So it's like, not only are you the least popular, but you're also doing the least amount of roster moves possible to potentially make the best roster on paper. So it's like, come on now, you know.
But then also, like, you never know, because there's such a long time before these orgs have to hard lock in, and then there's the mid-season thing, and that's after the Brazil event.
Yeah,
they could be doing a long period of scouting.
No, they might be. They might be. Yeah, I completely.
By the way, that would even help you in the market. Let everyone else take their players. You can just get yours at rock bottom price, right?
Yeah, if that's what they're doing, then yeah, fair enough. Go ahead.
Will say, like, I had a suspicion that they weren't going to get rid of anyone really quickly, purely because they released an announcement video where Nicole, their CEO, called all of the players individually, telling them they were in. No org is going to post that video and then announce they're ditching all of those players.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, if they ever did embrace their slogan, which is "Live Evil," that would be a great way to do it. Obviously, they obviously never have, though. If people don't know, that is probably the most misaligned bloody branding of all time, isn't it? Because they don't live evil. The jokers, they're the ones like, "Oh, are you feeling okay? Like, you don't have to play if you don't want." Like, it's the opposite, isn't it? I know.
It's not really like the G2, is
exactly,
it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that would work for them, but
I'm not even against like the way that they've done it in the LCS, and part of that is because I actually really fucking enjoy the story that they've had in the LCS, and I'm a big Jojo Pium fan. But I think that if they, I don't know, there's a big part of me that's like, okay, if they do that in Valorant, still just do it with 5 new players. Like, get rid of, like, just wash it clean and let's start. And I want to see what you start with and build from 0, let's say. And like, yeah, bring in your fucking equivalent of a Vulcan and your impact, so that you have these, like, you know, more established players, and then bring in like the little, like, new guys, the diamonds in the rough. But like, we've already seen this roster for a while. I'm bored of it. I want something new. Like, I don't mind that kind of like method, but I would still like it to
have to be good
start
as well.
Again from the new year.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, let's do a little bit of EMEA stuff. So as you alluded to before, the big news on the EMEA one, because think about how whack this would be if you were just a hardcore fan who doesn't care about business and just wants the tournament. Right, so you finish watching Champions. Oh, I can't wait to watch FPX and Optic play next. What? Excuse me? And then there's none of them are in the league. Like, so the good news is, like, FPX, it looks like it's going to keep together. Now, look, the downside is, the one name you don't want to hear is like, but Ardis won't be there, of course. Like, all right, then. Well, I mean, okay. Bring in the new Messi, I guess. Like, fucking hell. Like, so, like, that's not great, but there's still, the team staying together is pretty good, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the one player, I guess the 2 players you really didn't want to leave would have been Angel and Ardis, like the in-game leader and the star player. Realistically, you really did not want them to leave under any circumstance. And the good news is that Angel's staying. I think Angel's very good at finding talent, and I think he's definitely proven that. He has a very long history, you know, especially in CS, especially like on the Hellraisers as well. You know, he has a very long history.
Also, by the way, crucially, never was in Na'Vi, and remember, in that region, Na'Vi is the one you want to be at. That's the team you want to play. It's the T1 of the region. Yeah. So, you know, he's a very smart guy. I've spoken to him loads of times. He's lovely as well. He's such a nice guy. And I think he's definitely got the right mindset from some of the players that I know they're sort of seeking to replace Ardis as like potential candidates. So I think we'll see what happens there. I think they're all every like EMEA team right now is kind of just waiting to see what Ardis does realistically. And obviously he does have offers from North America and EMEA respectively. So it's like, okay, you know, I can understand that. Okay. And, you know, I think it just comes down to wherever he goes will have like a domino effect on all these other organizations. Because it's like, oh, if Ardis goes to North America, then that means that there's a spot on Na'Vi, but then also there might be a spot on another team because that player would have potentially went to that team, but now he's going to Na'Vi. So it's like, oh, you know, it's like this, it's like, yeah. So they're all just kind of waiting for Ardis pretty much. There are deals going on. Like I know Fnatic aren't really concerned about this because they're basically like they're really trying to get 2 players that I know of. But again, the rest of the teams I know are they're just all in a bit of a limbo pretty much. Some of the like Spanish teams and French teams, they're not really that concerned because it's like they kind of want to go for like Spanish rosters and French rosters, you know, they're not really that concerned, I guess. But some of the other teams, yeah, they're definitely really involved. So
yeah, I think we'll see what happens. I still think Na'Vi will be, once they sign, I still think Na'Vi will be probably one of the best teams in the world. And I do believe that whoever they do end up getting to replace Ardis, I think, it's obviously still not a foregone conclusion because Ardis deals may fall through, etc., you know. Well, I mean, that, okay, I think is a bit out, maybe, but, so there isn't, it's not a foregone conclusion that Ardis won't be playing with Na'Vi, but it's looking very likely that he won't be. So I think there are a lot of players, I guess you could replace him with, but it's will the player that they try and get sort of reach the same level as Ardis, right? Because he's proven this internationally now. He's proven that he can be one of the best players in the world. And I think that is the big crux is playing at Masters and Champions. It's can you really do it? We've seen it in North America. Some players can't hack it, for the first time. They really can't. And they need more experience. And potentially this is why some of the other guys that might be more experienced, but potentially, less on the whole sort of firepower, and they're not really that explosive, but, might be quite good internationally and have played sort of a solid role and they've played for quite a long time. I can understand the pickup,
By the way, on that as well, I got the vibe from him. I've also spoken to him a bit privately. I don't get the vibe at all that he's just on the role of give me all the money. I want the biggest offer ever. He is one of those guys for real, just like in FPX, where I believe he will play for less if it's the best team. He's one of the guys that he just wants to be the best, man. He wants to be the best team. He doesn't want the $1 million if it's on his shit team. Yeah. I'll tell you that.
And that's who he wants on his team as well. He doesn't sort of cultivate this I guess environment where these players have to want to win. If you don't want to win, you're out. I'm sorry, but this is just, if you're not 100% with this project, then he will probably find someone who will. And I think that's very important to have. I know some of the other players, Zip and Sugetsu, especially Shao, they've all proven that they could do this at the highest level, and they've all proven that they're committed to Angel's plan and his tactics, right? So I completely understand that, Ardis obviously might have to make a move, and I understand that he's a player. He's a very wanted player. So realistically, the replacement will have to be someone who can buy into the system, can perform at international events, and that sort of narrows the list a little bit. But I still think there's a lot of talent, especially from some of the teams that didn't get in EMEA. So,
I wanted to ask about, by the way, because I want to get Gio's take on this, is a massive blockbuster move that might be happening. If you think about it, on paper, it makes perfect sense. Is CNED goes to Vitality and reunites with Born Cold. That'd be a pretty big one, right?
Yeah, it would be, at least some reminiscence of the older Send roster. And that also means that they wouldn't, because obviously with big roster reshuffles, you have to be concerned to a certain extent about synergizing players who haven't played together and stuff like that. So something like that would definitely be a benefit and would be really cool. I think that it will be interesting to see what Vitality's roster ends up as, purely because, like George said, there are going to be a lot of rosters, I think, or a lot of orgs in EU that will have a preference for a nationality, or at least a language.
Yes.
Sure. And I think Vitality will, I guess, end up being one of these more international ones. Yeah. And a bit more of a rainbow squad.
Yeah, compared to K-Corp, 100%. Vitality will be an English-speaking team.
By the way, there's even an angle on that people always miss. Because the obvious angle is, it's the Brazilian angle. It's we're trying to tap into that huge French base that obviously in the RLs is enormous. Spain, of course. You got all those big people, Ibai and stuff. They get all the viewers. Here's the angle that no one ever brings up, because this also applies in League of Legends. That's also a sneaky game you can play to sign players that aren't as good. Because what you do is you go, he's Spanish, isn't he? So we're supporting the Spanish scene, but you just get the up and coming Spanish player that's cheap, and that wasn't the guy everyone's. You can also do it that way. You can be cynical and go the other way too. It doesn't have to just be superstar. You don't have to have everyone doesn't have to sign Mixwell if they're Spanish. They can just get a no-name if they want.
I would imagine that K-Corp are going to spend quite a decent amount of money, knowing, or at least what I've heard about who they're looking at.
Well, it was reported earlier. They're trying to get Scream and Navira.
Oh, it was actually reported? Okay, that's what I'm
Yeah, I heard it as well, but I can't confirm it, because it's I prefer to wait until the deals actually get to the last stages.
Right.
But,
okay.
If there's a potential that Scream and Navira, who, by the way, will only go to a team if they're as brothers, as a two. It's like a Vic and Crashies. They will only go if they're going as a pair. So if they go to K-Corp and say, look, I could build you a French-speaking roster, and it'll be fucking good. I have faith in them, and if I think XMS is rumored to be going with them as well. Again, I think he's another good pickup. I think he was very good on Mad Lions, especially. So I would have faith in them. I think if you're a K-Court fan, I would definitely be very, very excited because I think Scream and Nivera are incredible.
I'm curious then, though, if Team Liquid ends up being one of the potential homes for artists, like having lost Scream, I think he would be a good replacement to look at. And Liquid are obviously going to be an organization who have the money for whatever it is that his buyout is and whatever, and would be great to build around. What I would love to see Team Liquid do is just spend some money on a good IGL, please.
I think that will happen, Gio. I'm not gonna lie. I do think it will happen. I think, look, realistically, if Liquid don't come out of this off-season period like without an IGL, I'm sorry, but I have lost all faith in that organization because I think they will. From what I know, anyway, I'm pretty sure they will get themselves a solid in-game leader.
And it's been my biggest issue with Team Liquid for the whole time I've been in Valorant. Is just like, please, just yeah.
I also wondered in that team, by the way, when I saw the people that they picked up and how they all like stick with certain names. That is an org that, like, the other teams, like even the NA ones, like, yeah, they have a lot of CS players, but obviously usually it's like 3 CSGO players. Like one guy wasn't from any game, and then one's from like Fortnite or something. Team Liquid was the one which just all CSGO 24/7, and it's like if you even look at the names they've added, it's like bloody hell, is it ever going to be? So that implies to me, by the way, the players probably have a lot of say in who joins and who they're scouting out next, etc. So I get the vibe similarly on that one because, like, yeah, at this point in time, surely you got an IGL. Like when we had Sliggy on the show, he had some mad fucking takes as well. Like one of his takes for real was like he doesn't want to leave Team Liquid, he's actually leaving for real. So they sort of like go to shit and realise all the problems they have, and then there's even some fucked up angle he sort of seeded of like, and then maybe I'll come back later. Like, what the fuck? This is like some mad shit. Like, your dad doesn't just go to the gas station. He's like, 2 years later, he comes back like, did you sort everything out? Shall I be your dad again? Like, what the So, like, I don't know, mate. It sounds like on that one, he knew, like, basically, after, because the real problem that team had, we've discussed it a million times, is like, they had all these players that would be good star players, but then they just try to, like, rotate them around the spots and try and make it up. They're an example of the player-run super team to me. I know they're not super, but you know what I mean? Like, they just think, oh, we're all great players, so we'll all make it work. It's like, just fucking pick the players, make a team.
Yeah, I think the Liquid one especially was always, I think, very interesting. And I think it's very interesting you mentioned Ardistio earlier, because remember, when Liquid actually picked up remember, it was Fish 123, right? That sort of British team.
Back in the day,
yeah, it was like Soulcast, Link, Cryptix, Eccles, and Scream. Remember, Ardis was actually like in that roster prior to Scream. So
that's before my time. So I didn't actually know that.
Well, I mean, Ardis was actually on that roster before he went to G2. And obviously that kicked off, the whole G2 run where it was like G2 were looking really good, and G2 were winning everything in EU, because once he left Fish 123 and then Fish 123 joined Liquid, it was sort of a battle between G2 and Liquid as to who the best teams in EMEA would be during that time, like First Strike and things like that. But yeah, now they've obviously Sliggy was a part of that British roster as well. They brought over from CS mainly, and now I think Soulcast is really the only one that remains. So we'll see what happens. But I think Liquid, they definitely have I think getting rid of Scream and Nivera, I think would be huge losses to the team, but I don't think it's the end of the world, because I do think they've still got some very, very good players. I think Emil, especially as a coach, obviously Doom Bros is twins, obviously from FPX, a very, very good coach, and he's very, very smart in what he does. And I've spoken to him a few times. He has a very good outlook on the game.
Is he an identical twin?
Yeah, he's identical twin with Doom Bros. Yeah,
because here's the thing I think's fucked up about that. Right, in that scenario. Why not just, if you're at like the World Championship, just dress up like him, sneak in there and go like, oh, remember what I was, sorry, I bumped my head or something. Remember what we were going to do at the beginning? Then all I'm saying is I've got a whole movie playing out of my mind, and I was told the shit I'd be doing exactly.
Yeah.
And technically, unless they've ever been at the same LAN, does he have an identical twin? We'll never know.
Well, yeah, because
maybe he just coaches 2 teams. This guy's a fucking G.
Yeah, maybe.
As long as they don't both make a LAN, that's all I'm saying. Someone look into it. Has anyone ever seen them both in the same room? And was it a mirrored video? Was there a mirror? See, there's a level to this, Gio, no one's even tried to explore. I'm asking the big questions.
I'm thinking there's a competitive integrity argument to be had here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
identical twins from esports.
I mean, I will say, they do say a bloody stick in the water. It's like, better bloody not be in this team, son. Let's hook him up to the lie detector. What have you told your brother exactly?
Yeah, if it was Liquid versus Na'Vi, it will be it'll be brothers versus brothers. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens there. But again, I think Liquid will be fine. I think even if they get rid of Scream and Navira, I think realistically there's a lot of good talent in EMEA that you could pick up instead of them. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. I think Liquid will be good. Scream and Navira are obviously also very good in their own right. I think if they go to K-Corp, build their own sort of French-speaking roster again, I think that'll be, first of all, very good move, like PR-wise. K-Corp has some of the most insane fans I've ever seen in my life. Like,
and obviously matches the region. They can speak French.
Of course, speak French.
Perfect,
yes. So I guess it is kind of written in the stars, if that makes sense, because it's like, K-Corp don't exactly have the best roster. I wouldn't even say they have like a top 5 in EMEA. So I think if you get Scream and Navira to build sort of a roster there, I think very, very smart decision from K-Corp.
By the way, since we referenced it earlier with the wild idea that maybe it was the Cloud9 move, that's one thing I've found incredibly conspicuous. Yeah, it's announced that all the players from Gambit /M3C are available. There's not a single piece of news tying any of them to any org or move. What's going on?
Well, I mean, Chronicle is linked with Fnatic. I think that's been made pretty public.
Okay, there's one.
So Chronicle has been linked with Fnatic. Now, Nats is the important one because there is a lot of speculation about Nats, and obviously he is one of the most popular players, I guess, out of that entire roster. He was, I guess, arguably the star player when you consider the fact that, he's playing on a role that isn't the star role.
And, he basically invented a meta.
Exactly. He was known as the biggest fucking rat on the planet because of the way he plays. And it's like, yeah, but he plays that really well. He's one of the best Sentinel, arguably the best Sentinel player in the world. So I understand that. Now, Nats is very interesting because he has a lot of offers, but I believe as of right now, he hasn't picked a team yet. And I think he is just sort of fielding them all out. And then you've got Redgar, obviously the in-game leader. Redgar is in talks with a team. I think that'll be known pretty soon. And then you've got
that's what I've heard about.
Shados. Yeah. Shados, I don't actually think I've heard a lot about. I think Shados is probably one of the few players that I would say, yeah, maybe not. I guess I don't have a lot of information on. And then JD will be playing in Ascension, and I think final player, I guess Purpo, I guess, I don't know if you consider him a player, but he played like one map or whatever. Yeah, I guess he's just going to be in Ascension as well. So, I think the big ones would be Redgar, Chronicle, Nats as the ones to sort of look out for. I think if Fnatic get Chronicle, I think that would be very, very good and very smart. But I think, again, it sort of comes down to roles and how he's going to play. Because I know Chronicle played Chamber, and I know he played like Duelist as well. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot to come sort of in the next few weeks, because I know some of them are actually moving as well. Obviously, with the whole conflict going on,
they obviously have to find another country to go to and get the national right. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I know. I believe 2 of them have moved country now, so they are really trying to sort of, get themselves sorted elsewhere. And it's not a very like easy thing to do, is it? Just pick up your whole life and move it to another country. So they are really trying. So I think probably like prior to October 15th, we will probably know where those 3 go. But I think it will just sort of take a little bit more time. Yeah, they are definitely wanted for sure.
By the way, what you said earlier about Nats, there's the other thing that sucks if you're a player in this mix of musical chairs waiting to see if you get a chair. Sometimes your whole scenario, you're waiting for the big dog to make his choice. And until he picks where he's going, you don't even know who actually you can go to. So the joke there is you're like the secondary school for that team. They're like, look, like the safety school. They're like, look, we do really want to sign you, but we kind of have to wait and see if this guy wants to come instead. And he's got like all the offers in the world right now, and so he's just sat back and going like, which shall I choose? And then your whole life just hangs in the balance on that. And the worst thing, if you're that player, by the way, is that's one of the other reasons why, by the way, teams love these like franchising opportunities, because that's where you get that guy to sometimes pull the trigger too early because he's scared he gets left out on the musical chairs game, and that at the end it's too late when that player decides like, oh, but that was the team I needed. So sometimes you can even get that guy cheap immediately, just like quickly give him the security, sign him up. Like, that's why people don't realize, like, I've always said this, I know in this case you're not buying in, but when you do have a franchise league, at this point in the game where there's not much money coming up from the fans and the game dev doesn't give you that much, and you just make it for some sponsors on the side, aside as an org, the customer of the league is the team. They're the ones you keep happy. They're the ones you offer all these up. That's why, by the way, you notice the real genius of OWL, it was a terrible idea for a league because the game was never that big. The genius of OWL, though, was to tell people, right, now you're in the door, I've got this thing called CDL, I can sell you one. You know what? You could be the first customer, roll up, like, I've got you this spot. Like, that's the plan. It's like, get you on the payment plan, get you in this game, in this game, this game. So, yeah, in this scenario, like, that's one of the reasons why, again, I knew certain orgs that hadn't put any effort into Valorant were going to come immediately. That's why one other org, quickly, I know this is an NA one, but I just want to get people's thoughts on this one. If you're talking about purely, take out Scandal and things like that, if you're talking purely like enormous names, and you talk about America's, FaZe Clan's got it immediately, like they're like the elephant in the room. Like, what do you think about that? That they're not in the game at all? Because they were obviously teasing that they kept trying to get serious and trying to make signings, right?
FaZe Clan is such a really shady org that it does not surprise me in the slightest that they didn't make it into the partnership program.
Yeah, I think again, it's like, I mean, obviously optics, they don't look great for FaZe. It's just like, come on, we know you've done all these things in the past. And again, if Riot is setting the line where they allow one team who potentially has a bad past, but then let's say you allow another team who potentially has an even worse past, actually, you know, let's say you allow one of them in, but not the other. It's just like, I guess, doesn't really look that great, I guess. But I can understand the angle of wanting FaZe to be in the league or sort of making an argument for FaZe to be in the league. And I completely understand that. But I think, it does come down to things like financials and optics at the end of the day. And I know they're one of the few organizations that actually have their financials public, right? And I think they got pretty shit on from some of the reports that I've been reading about how they...
It was something like the expectation was, if the expectation was 40 million, they'd made like 30 million and then they lost a bunch of money as well or something like that, right?
Yeah, but then, again, you could just argue, well, that's the same for every organization. You know, there's barely any that are profitable if, you know, if maybe one or two, I guess, maybe push the mark. But this is the thing, you know, you pay these ridiculous salaries in North America and you don't, like, no fan ever wants to pay for anything. So, you know, you're screwed. So, you know, it's just, I don't know. I can understand why FaZe wasn't in. And also, again, they have, you know, they were in from the start. I remember, there was the whole big thing about them getting Jason R, right? So, you know, I remember they signed him actually at one point. So again, it's like, oh God, do we really have to deal with this? You know, it's another one where it's like, oh, it's like this guy's got another controversy attached to him, and then that can be attached to us.
Apparently, anyone with a capital R on their name.
He wouldn't play with women, right?
It's the one who he made the joke where, because his wife, I think, doesn't want him to like stream with them. He just did something like he bans you from the chat if you say you're a woman as well. I think half of it was supposed to be a meme, but the problem with that again is it's like that joke of like, I was just pretending to be an idiot on the internet. It's like, well, a lot of people can't tell the difference, can they? And also, spoiler, if you pretend too much, like you're a method actor, aren't you?
Stuff about that, and it was sort of like
it was in CS:GO years ago.
There is a way of making that funny, and instead it just came across as really
because it just came across like I actually just hate women, unfortunately, especially if people didn't know him. Yeah,
it was just so weird,
stupid as well, because it's like in Valorant, we might finally have a game where women are actually, you know, they actually might have fun playing the game professionally, because historically there have been other games where they just get blasted and said, oh, you're shit and all these kinds of stuff. And it's just like, we've got a dedicated circuit, game changers, you know, and I think we've got a lot of like talented women streamers as well, especially, and there's a lot more people, definitely, and I think I've noticed it and a lot of other people have noticed it. There's just more like women players now, and I think we've all sort of
well done for noticing all those women players, George. Well done.
Oh, well, I mean, you know, I think that's
whatever. I'm just fucking with you, obviously.
Yeah,
and by the way, obviously you meant for pros. I can guarantee you, everyone tells Gio she's shit when she plays and fucking wrecks you if she talks on the mic, right?
I mean, you know, I think that's a bit different, but it's like you've finally got like
when people
a
tell me I'm
scene.
shit when I play, I'm deserving of it.
Fair enough. Okay, you own it. All right.
It's just like you've finally got a scene where like women are actually integrated into the professional circuit. They've got their own dedicated circuit now, and it's really good. And it's like, so it's like really you just decide to shit on them on stream. Like, come on, Jason. Like you haven't picked the fucking like. Do you know what I mean? You could have picked the stupid like idiots that like lock in Reyna or something.
Yes.
You picked like an entire demographic to shit on. It's like, are you really that stupid? Like, come on, man. It's just.
I think the thing is, it's such like low hanging fruit. But I think also the thing with that is like, at least from my perspective, it doesn't even feel like he's like shitting on women, or at least with the whole banning thing. It just comes across like he's like, it has insecure virgin vibes. And I understand that the man was married, right? But it's just, that's the thing, is it feels very incel-y, which is just sort of like, it's not like, I'm not offended by it, but it's like, what are you doing?
Here's the problem, though.
That's more the vibe.
What people won't realise is the way he's fucked himself on that one is that this incident, by the way, happened years ago in CSGO. And the problem was, at the time, he was never the biggest. He was like a niche streamer. It's like him and Flom and people like that had their own little niche. And by the way, if you don't know, this actually ties into the premise of the aforementioned Tate guy. He was a guy who wasn't trying to be mainstream. He wasn't trying to appeal to... He wasn't thinking about Riot Games is going to be involved with him one day. He's come up through this like side current of like the manosphere and all that stuff, and TikTok and YouTube before you get banned. So the whole premise for Jason R, I think, essentially was like, I only have to care about my little community who like me. I'm never going to have to think about the wider world. But naively, what he hasn't realised in doing so is, if you ever want to be involved with games like that the dev's involved with, remember CSGO, they don't give a fuck, then that actually will, unfortunately, come back to haunt you, especially as far as I know. I can't be certain on this, but I don't think he's sort of tried to make great public strides to like correct his image or whatever. I think he's just sort of who gives a fuck, you know.
Yeah, of course. I mean, he's got his own little community, like, you know, and I'm sure if it stays that way, he'll, you know, be all right. But it's just
he's in his own little world. By the way, one thing I want to ask you about was this. And obviously, the bigger thing for me than the whole thing that like G2's not in is, right, one thing I want to just check on this, George, is before it was announced publicly that teams were in, they were, in theory, already shopping players and talking to players. So here's the weird thing people haven't thought of. All those G2 players, some of them will have thought, I'm in this fucking league. I'm in G2. Yes. Whereas now, all of a sudden, they're all in this game of... It's actually worse for them, for some of them.
Weren't G2 planning on fully buying out another team?
Yes, they were planning to buy
They're going to ban out X. So it's actually the Exet players that
it's the other way, right?
Really sorry for, Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I think it also, like, some of the staff members as well that I spoke to were particularly very, very pissed off, because G2 had sort of this idea for like weeks prior to Riot even saying, oh, you're in or whatever. They were under the impression that they were in North America.
Oh, no doubt.
Like, full stop, you know, it's going to be fine. And then, oh no, the fucking top G fucking comes along and all this kinds of shit. It's like, oh, for fuck's sake. Like, you just ruined it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
oh, you know something I just realised that's so sad as well? All of a sudden, that classic stunt that Carlos did pull of the Fox Sentinels, if they were in the Americas...
That was hilarious.
That would be amazing to ignite that rivalry, wouldn't it? Yeah.
It would have been good. It's like, if you wanted to be cool and like fucking make a little like rivalry going, it would have been banging. You would have had G2, you would have had Brazilian teams. There would also be
people who'd cry about it, because I swear like American players cry a lot more than
of course they do. But I think it's like, I think they understand like the rivalry aspect. And I think it's fair when it's like... It would have been fucking amazing if you would have had the personality of Carlos with like Sentinels and Brazilian teams. Like, that would have been fucking amazing to watch. But it's like, oh, they just inadvertently go and fuck themselves because, our CEO decided to party with him. And it's like, oh, here we go. Like, and then all these players just get fucked. And it's just, I do feel really, really bad for them. Even the staff members, I feel bad for.
I do feel bad for the people, because I have a friend who works for a different org who was really involved in putting together their application. And I remember they were fucking stressed, like throughout the process of putting together this application, like just seeing how much work they were putting into it. So knowing that there were people at G2 who were going through that, right? Because I've seen my friend do that, and knowing you put all that work in, probably really late nights, like over, you know, like you're out of hours and stuff, and it just comes crashing down because of like someone else being a man-child. You know, it's like, I don't even think the worst part is the fact that he was partying with Andrew Tate. I think the worst part is all of the fucking weird likes and like all the shit and the Phoenix picture and whatever. It's like, really stupid, what are you doing? You're not 14. This isn't 4chan. But I digress. The point is like, I'm sure for the people who work at G2, knowing that all that hard work went to shit because of something else that wasn't in their control must feel like fucking garbage.
Yeah, it's terrible. I know that, you know, sometimes these like applications, they're like like hundreds of pages long. They have to go through financial data. They have to go through all these kinds of deliverables that they got to say. And, it's like, we've accumulated this amount and we've done this much and we plan to do, you know what I mean? Like, they have to prepare these things for weeks. And it's like all of that got changed they got completely fucked over in a matter of days just because of this. And I think another thing that some of the other organizations I was speaking to, some of the big players, they were under the impression that they thought G2 was a shoo-in. They were like, yeah, okay, I expect to be in this league with G2. I completely expect that to happen. And then as soon as, obviously, because what had happened is Riot had obviously picked the teams, as far as I'm aware, they had picked the teams prior to when that event happened. And obviously, as soon as they had picked the teams, they went through all these kinds of stuff. But then Riot Global actually overruled that decision because I was under the impression that G2 was going to be in that North America spot, and they would have had a spot there. And then there was kind of like a weird debacle as well behind the scenes regarding NIP, because I know that, like, right. Yeah, that's another thing as well. Like these things have like knock-on effects with other organizations, and it's like, I don't know. I feel kind of bad for some of these teams and some of these like big people, some of these organizations, especially at G2, even like the exec guys. I do feel bad for them because like some of the players being under G2 would have been fucking brilliant. G2 Cryo and Zekken and Def, that would have been, and you would have kept the roster together as well. Like this roster has been playing really well and insane. It's like, at least now
Cryo's found his route to safety now.
Oh yeah, I mean, of course, but it's like this is like another. What we could have actually had a situation where Xset might have been the only big team to have stayed together. And because G2 was offering that, they were sort of offering that freedom. But now, obviously it's never going to happen. But yeah, I don't know. I think like the whole incident, I think, just in my opinion, I think Carlos just handled it really, really poorly. I think very, very stupid for even posting it on Twitter, I think, in the first place is really bizarre to me. Because I just think if you just wouldn't have posted that, like it's so easy to say, just don't post it. But it's just like we understood, like he knew the reaction he would get, I guess, but then he didn't expect.
Well, here's the thing, George.
Once he doubled down,
there was actually everyone was posting it as a meme recently because a little while ago, it wasn't even that long ago. It was maybe, I'm going to say, like month, maybe 2 months max. He went on that Double Lift talk show, the one that Lena just sets up and invites the guests, and then the joke is Double Lift's the host, but like if anything, you'd think he was just a guest. Like, oh really? And then there's all talking. They had this mega episode where it was Joe Marsh from T1, it was Steve Arhanset from Team Liquid, and it was Carlos from G2. And as you can imagine, Carlos bosses the group, right? He's like bantering them all. He's given and he famously says in this is a very telling statement because I'm actually friends with Carlos. I know him quite well. He says on this show, almost as like a brag, because he was actually trying to say it to Joe Marsh, because Joe Marsh has had this whole thing in League of Legends. Well, obviously he's an American, but he's got this legendary Korean org and Korean players. And the way Koreans, as people might know from K-pop, the people who are stans, like they don't fuck around. Like they are hardcore.
Oh,
they're not even, they're not even just sending you like a nasty message on Twitter. Like they put it this way, at the level of like K-pop stuff, they might try and like a nutter might try and kill you or something it goes really calm because we're talking about like they have idol culture there. So what happens is obviously they had that whole thing where they kept sending public statements, like they sent a wreath when they were going to hire a certain person, then they sent these trucks when the team wasn't winning, right? So basically Carlos was trying to sort of give Joe Marsh like what I would do if I was in your position, and what he basically says is like I would just get a massive bus like 5 lengths long, one of those huge ones, and I'd just be on it going fuck you to all the like fans, right? And then Carlos himself, as like sort of a humble brag, was like, in fact, I hope one day that G2 fans ask for me to be fired from G2 and I'll just do the biggest fuck you of all time and I'll leave. So here's the thing people don't realize is that was always actually the way he did it. Like essentially the problem is you can't really go in every scenario like, that was going to happen, because the problem is he's the guy who's probably gotten away with stuff like that more than anyone ever because he carried it with his charisma. He carried it with the branding. But here's the mistake he made, in my opinion. The biggest mistake was he actually didn't think of this, which is Carlos the brand. Like Gio said, he could come back tomorrow. He could make a different team. He could make a team that explicitly leans into that and is edgy sponsors. He could 100%. Make his own squad in any other game. He could probably make any company he wants. He's just an amazing media personality with a great mind for marketing. And I actually think this is the key thing. You know that term anti-fragile, the concept that when bad things happen to you, it actually makes your brand bigger. By the way, you could say I've done that in my career, but that's the key thing. I don't work for ESL. I don't have my own massive company where there's all the people underneath me. I'm just me. So I can roll with it because as long as I'm cool with it, I can go to the next person and find someone who doesn't mind working that way or doesn't mind an edgy tweet.
It's the whole philosophy that, and I've only watched this because I watched a Devin Nash video where he spoke about it and I went and looked it up. But Logan Paul did this podcast where he was talking about how...
Oh, they're a great example of this premise,
He was like, if you want me to disappear, if you want to deplatform me, stop talking about me.
Yes. No, that's the premise. The premise goes, like, here's the joke. I only found out about the Logan Paul guy when he did that incredibly famous insensitive thing. So the joke is, that doesn't in any way, because of how he's marketing his brand, that doesn't ever damage him. It only makes more people talk about him. And then the joke is, talking about him actually allowed him and his brother to backdoor into the biggest boxing fights in the world. But here's the problem. Carlos, the individual, could do that. But the mistake he made was this. It's not even just Carlos and the Carlos the brand or just G2. If he was the sole owner of G2 or him and his dad owned G2, again, they could tell everyone, fuck off. We'll get new sponsors. By the way, there would be some companies who come in. There'd be some betting company or whatever. But here's the problem they had. They actually have shareholders. That's where actually the mistake was made. Because as George said earlier, when you have like shareholders and then they have connections to businesses and they want certain league spots and they want certain sponsors to come in. Now it doesn't matter whether you have like the principle, I'm going to hold to this, or even more, you don't agree that you did something wrong. The problem is if the perception is, well, that's not how companies act. Companies always bend the knee. That's why companies being real people and the way it's treated is so dangerous, because they can just have no principles and be like, yo, whatever you guys want us to say, we believe that. Yeah, brilliant marketing and we're back, right? So the mistake he made, it's why if you notice when he left, he was very careful to phrase it as like, he never said like, I was wrong and I shouldn't. What he said basically is like, I feel really shit about it. I feel destroyed because and also one of the reasons he said he was going to step down is because he realized like the impact it would have on other people in the company. So I think that's the issue, is individually, I think it was totally on brand for what he does. And I think actually he could have rizzled his way out of it. He probably still could if he wanted to, but I don't think he could do it as G2 in games like Riot games, like run leagues where they're already looking for every little thing in detail to weed you out. So yeah, that was the biggest mistake of all. It's like that angle, it's true. Essentially, he would have had to do the greatest escape of all time to somehow make this one work. Yes.
Well, also, like, he will have been voted out by a board of directors. And likely they would have agreed to sign a contract that is like non-disparagement on both sides. And we just, we go our separate ways. And like that's why he will have said it the way he did. But it just reminded me a lot of like when the whole Blizzard scandal happened and people were talking about how it was such a terrible thing that the board of directors had refused to vote out Bobby Kotick, right? And that's what it just immediately reminded me of, is like, why have people forgotten? So this was such a major part of the news, like however long ago it was. Why have people suddenly forgotten that that's how like the decisions based around CEO employment works?
Yes.
Like people suddenly were like, oh, this is like the fans have made Carlos leave. Like, no, like the board of directors on G2 will have gotten rid of him. Like, it's because
I get the vibe, like I say, I get the vibe people colloquially just still think Carlos owns G2, if you know what I mean. He does own obviously a state, but they still think like he's just the guy who's rich.
100%.
Yeah. So they thought like if he chooses not to leave, exactly. But no, you obviously right, that's the way all companies work now.
Yeah.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Hades GOUD, Kai L, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Kovacevicd, Pacy, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Thooorin, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest? Would you like to ask a question for my monthly EMEA? Do you want teasers on who's going to be the upcoming interview subjects in my content? Do you want to take part in one of those long discussions with me about anything in esports? Well, if so, all of the above perks are available if you put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.